There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I used to believe that RV parks were the safest places in the world. You roll in after a long drive, plug into the hookups, hear the hum of neighboring generators, smell the smoke of someone else's fire drifting across the evening air, and think, this is community. This is comfort. But safety is an illusion. I learned that lesson not once, but many times at different campgrounds scattered across this country. And each time, I walked away with a story I wish I didn't have to carry. My name is David. I'm 54 years old, and I've been camping in an RV since my 20s. What I'm about to tell you isn't stitched together from imagination. These are truths carved into me by nights where the shadows whispered louder than reason, and the silence pressed closer than walls. It began years ago in a quiet park in New Mexico, not far from the desert's edge. I was traveling alone, parked between two aging motorhomes that looked abandoned even though their hookups were connected. The air smelled dry, electric, like a storm might build but never break. The wind rattled the scrub outside and carried sand against the aluminum sides of my rig. That night, I remember waking to the sound of tapping. Not loud, not forceful, just a single knuckle against glass, again and again. My first thought was wind. My second was exhaustion, but the rhythm was too precise, too patient. It moved from window to window, circling the RV. I wanted to believe it was some prank, a drunk drifter maybe, but when I sat up and looked outside, the gravel lot was empty, no footprints, no shadows, just the endless desert night, wide and hollow. When I finally built the courage to step outside, flashlight in hand, the two motorhomes beside me seemed wrong. Curtains drawn, no light, no sound of life within. But the sand at their doors was untouched, no footprints going in or out. I stood there, beam shaking in my hand, telling myself it was all in my head, until the tapping came again, from inside my RV this time. That's when I ran back in, slammed the door, locked it, and sat with my back against it until dawn. In the morning, there was nothing. No marks, no sign that anything had happened at all. But I couldn't shake the truth I felt in my bones, that something had tried to be let in, and I almost gave it the chance. That wasn't the last time I felt watched. Years later in Colorado, I camped near the Rockies at a family-run RV park. The couple who owned it were kind, older, the sort who insisted on giving you a map with circled spots to see. But something about the place pressed on me. Maybe it was the way the trees crowded the campsites, their trunks black against the sky, their branches clicking like teeth in the wind. The air always seemed colder than it should have been. Nights dragged heavy, and no matter how many campers pulled in, the place felt empty. On my third night, I woke to the sound of footsteps, not on gravel, not on leaves, on the roof of my RV, slow, steady, like someone pacing above me. I froze, staring at the ceiling as if it might bow under weight. I told myself, raccoon, maybe a stray cat. But the steps were too measured, too heavy, and they stopped directly above where I lay. My breath turned shallow. I reached for my phone for some kind of lifeline, but before I could dial, a voice whispered through the vents. It wasn't words I could understand, but it wasn't wind either. A guttural murmur, low and human, dragging syllables too close to speech. I didn't sleep until the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, the grass around my RV was pressed flat in a circle, as if something had stood there watching. The owners smiled when I told them I was cutting my stay short, but their eyes said something else, like they knew, like they'd heard it before. That night, driving away, I realized something chilling. Sometimes RV parks survive not because they're safe, but because people don't ask questions when they shouldn't. The worst night came in Louisiana, in a park that barely deserved the name. It sat near the bayou, the kind of place where the air itself feels thick, humid, carrying the stench of water that doesn't move. The owner was a gaunt man with sunken eyes, his voice carrying a rasp like he hadn't spoken much in years. He told me I'd be the only guest that night. Something in his grin made my stomach turn, but I stayed, because by then I thought I'd grown used to strange things. thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The air inside my RV refused to cool down, no matter how long the AC ran. It clung to me like a fever. As the night deepened, I began to hear something outside, wet dragging, like something heavy pulled across the mud. Over and over, circling my sight. I cracked the blinds just once. I shouldn't have. In the glow of the lone security light, I saw something move, not walking, but crawling, shoulders hunching, arms digging into the mud with each pull. It was too far to make out detail, but I knew it wasn't right. Not animal, not human. The sound didn't stop. It circled until morning, until I sat shivering in my chair with every light in the RV burning. And when the first light of dawn cracked the horizon, I stepped outside and saw deep furrows carved into the mud as if something had clawed its way around me for hours. The owner didn't ask how I slept, he just waved when I pulled out. That same sunken-eyed grin stretched wider. I never went back. Each of these nights taught me something. That RV parks, for all their promise of comfort and safety, are only as safe as the land they rest on. The desert, the mountains, the bayou, they all hold things we don't see in the daylight. Things that wait for nightfall, for quiet campers like us who think we've found peace. But sometimes peace is the bait, and once you've felt it, the tapping, the whispers, the footsteps above your bed, you don't see the campfire the same way again. You sit closer to the flame, listen harder to the silence, and wonder what's waiting just beyond the glow. I learned something about fear on those nights. It doesn't always come roaring in, doesn't always leap out from the darkness. Most times it seeps, quiet at first like a draft under the door, until you realize the whole room is cold. That's how it was when I stopped at a small RV park in northern Arizona. I was on my way toward the Grand Canyon, tired, dust in my eyes from hours of desert driving. The park wasn't much, just a scattering of hookups on hard-packed dirt, a flickering neon sign promising vacancy, though half the sites were overgrown with weeds. The manager was a woman with long gray hair, her face weathered like bark. She spoke in short sentences, always glancing over her shoulder toward the tree line at the edge of the property. When I asked about trails or nearby stores, she just shook her head and said, "Stay close to your rig." There was something final in her tone, as if it wasn't advice but a rule. That night, I sat outside, letting the desert air cool my skin. The sky was endless, stars burning sharp enough to cut. The wind moved through the dry grass, carrying with it the smell of something metallic, like blood in the air. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the way fatigue plays tricks, but the longer I sat, the stronger it grew. It clung to my nostrils, coated my throat, and each breath felt heavier. Then came the sound. A low hum, so faint I thought it was tinnitus at first. But it wasn't in my head. It grew louder, vibrating the air, a steady pitch that seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself. The ground trembled under my chair. I stood, heart hammering, and shone my flashlight toward the tree line. The beam caught nothing but branches swaying, shadows knotting together. The hum stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only silence, too deep, too expectant. I packed my chair and retreated inside, locking the door, pulling the shades. Still, the smell lingered, sharp and metallic, as if it was coming from the walls themselves. I hardly slept. By morning, the air was clean, the world normal again. The woman at the office gave me my change without a word. But before I left, she met my eyes and whispered, "It doesn't follow you if you don't follow it." I didn't ask what she meant. Some truths are too heavy to carry with a full tank of gas. Another story came from Oregon. I had been driving through thick pine forests for hours, the kind of roads where the canopy swallows the sky, where you feel like you're tunneling through the ribs of the earth itself. The RV park was hidden at the end of a narrow dirt road, a clearing carved out of the trees. Only a handful of campers were there, scattered like teeth across the lot. I remember the stillness, the way even the birds seemed reluctant to break the quiet. My first night was uneventful, but on the second I woke to a sound that still makes my skin crawl. Laughter. Not the cheerful kind you hear around a fire. This was distorted, stretched thin, like a recording played at the wrong speed. It came from outside, then from the woods, then from directly beneath my RV. I froze, ears straining. The laughter stopped. Then it started again, this time in my own voice. I couldn't breathe. My own laughter rising from under the floor. I dropped to the ground, pressed my ear to the vinyl, and heard it clearly. My voice, chuckling, low and broken, as if mocking me. I scrambled up, every nerve alive with panic. My hand hovered over the door lock, but instinct screamed not to open it. Instead, I sat back, gripping a flashlight like a weapon, whispering to myself that dawn was coming. And it did. When the sun lit the clearing, I forced myself outside. The ground beneath my RV was untouched. No signs of digging, no footprints. Just pine needles scattered like they always were. I asked one of the other campers, a man in his 60s, parked a few sites away, if he'd heard anything. He looked at me too long before shaking his head, but as I turned to leave, I heard him mutter just barely loud enough, "It copies what it wants." I drove away that morning, trees closing in behind me, and I've never returned to that park. Some places don't want visitors. They want echoes. But perhaps the most haunting experience I've carried happened in Kansas, at a roadside RV park that looked ordinary enough. Flat land, gravel lots, a few picnic tables, and a gas station at the entrance. Nothing remarkable. I pulled in late, around midnight, bone weary from pushing too many miles. There were only 2 other RVs in the park, both dark, both silent. As I tried to settle in, I noticed something off about the night air. No insects. No crickets, no cicadas, not even the distant bark of a dog. Just silence, so thick it felt unnatural. I tried the TV, the radio, anything for noise, but every channel was static. My phone had no service, though it had worked fine an hour earlier on the road. That silence pressed against me until my chest ached. Then came the knocking. Not on the windows this time, on the door. 3 slow raps, deliberate. I froze, staring at the handle, waiting for it to turn. It didn't. After a long pause, the knocking came again. I wanted to yell to scare whoever it was away, but my throat closed. My legs felt nailed to the floor. The 3rd time it knocked, I snapped. I lunged forward, yanked the door open, and shouted into the night. But no one was there. The gravel stretched empty under the yellow glow of the street lamp. My eyes darted to the 2 other RVs, still dark, still lifeless. I was about to slam the door shut when I noticed something on the ground, a small object left neatly on the first step. My blood ran cold as I picked it up. It was a photograph, faded, old. And in it, I was standing beside my RV, smiling, waving. But the background wasn't this park. It was nowhere I recognized, and I had no memory of that photo ever being taken. I dropped it, slammed the door, locked it twice. I didn't sleep. When morning came, the photo was gone. I searched the gravel, the grass, everywhere, nothing. As if the night itself had reclaimed it. That's the truth of RV Parks America. They promise you rest, community, safety, but under the surface, they hold shadows, echoes, and eyes that watch through the blinds. And when the night deepens, when silence settles too heavy, you learn that walls of metal and fiberglass don't keep the darkness out. They only keep you in. By the time I reached Texas, I thought maybe I'd just been carrying bad luck, that these experiences stacked up because I was on the road too much, too long, too often alone. But Texas has its own way of stripping you down. Out in the hill country, I stopped at a family-owned RV park near a bend in the river. From the road, it looked harmless. Kids' bikes leaned against picnic tables, a swing set sagged in the corner of a field, and the office sold ice cream sandwiches and bait. The sort of place where the ordinary reassures you. The owner, a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin, told me to pick any site on the back loop. But don't park under the pecan trees. He added with a sharpness that didn't match his easy smile. When I asked why, he shook his head. They drop more than nuts, he said, as if that explained everything. I chose a site on the loop's edge anyway, not beneath the trees, but near enough to hear them creak in the wind. That first night, the air turned heavy, thick with the scent of damp soil. I left my windows open, trying to cool the inside of the RV. Somewhere after midnight, I woke to the sound of something striking the roof. A heavy thud, then another, then a scatter like gravel rolling. At first, I thought it was the pecans the man had warned me about. But when I climbed out in the morning, I didn't find pecans. I found teeth. Human teeth, scattered across the roof, tiny and yellowed, some with roots still clinging. My stomach twisted. I scooped them into a towel and carried them to the office. The owner's face tightened when he saw. He didn't touch them. He didn't look surprised either. "Shouldn't have parked near the trees," he muttered, pushing the towel back toward me. "Best be on your way." His eyes darted to the windows behind me, as if making sure no one else had heard. I left that morning without asking further questions, and I never ate pecans again. I thought that was as strange as it could get. But months later, driving through Missouri, I pulled into a park where the rules were plastered on every wall, bold black letters on laminated sheets inside the office, the bathrooms, even taped to the picnic tables. At first, I laughed. Quiet hours strictly enforced, no wandering after 11 p.m. Do not, under any circumstances, acknowledge voices calling your name after dark. That last one made me pause, but I figured it was just someone's idea of dark humor. That night, the air was hot and still. The cicadas buzzed so loud it felt like the trees themselves were trembling. I lay in bed, restless, sheets damp with sweat. Then I heard it. My name. Not shouted, not even spoken in a way that demanded a response, just called out gently, like a friend looking for me in the distance. I sat up, heart pounding. The voice came again, closer this time. "David." The sound threaded through the air vents, slipping under the door, curling into the corners of the RV. My throat dried, but instinct pulled at me. I reached for the handle. Then my eyes caught the rule sheet taped to the cabinet above the sink. "Do not, under any circumstances, acknowledge voices calling your name after dark." I froze. The voice came again, softer, coaxing. "David, come out." My hand shook against the door. Every muscle wanted to move, to obey, to step into the night and find out who was calling. But I forced myself to sit back, hands pressed against my legs to keep from moving. For hours it circled, calling me, sometimes from far away, sometimes from right outside the window. And then, silence. At dawn, the park looked normal. Kids played near the swings, parents cooked breakfast over small stoves. No one spoke of the night, and when I mentioned the voice to another camper, a woman about my age, her smile faltered. "Best to read the rules," she said. Then she walked away. I didn't stay another night. There's something about the Midwest that gets under your skin. Maybe it's the flatness, the endless horizons that make you feel exposed, like the land itself is watching. In Illinois, I stopped at a park beside a cornfield. The stalks pressed close to the sights, tall enough to tower over my rig. That evening, I grilled a small meal outside, the air heavy with the smell of dust and earth. Just before sunset, I noticed shapes moving in the corn, slight shifts, the rustle of stalks parting. At first, I thought it was wind, but the air was still. As darkness fell, the rustling grew louder. Footsteps in the soil, slow, deliberate, circling. I turned on every outside light, hoping it would scatter whatever animals were out there. But the shapes didn't scatter. They edged closer, pressing just beyond the glow. I couldn't see faces, only the outlines of heads above the stalks, unmoving, watching. I forced myself inside, pulling the blinds, locking the doors. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until I could hear breathing outside the windows. Long, slow inhalations drawn in unison like a choir of lungs. My chest seized with panic. I clamped my hands over my ears, tried to drown it out. Hours passed. At some point, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. When morning came, the field looked untouched. No footprints, no broken stalks, just rows of corn swaying in the breeze. But I knew what I'd heard. What I'd felt pressing against those thin walls. And I knew it had watched me until sleep claimed me. That's the cruelest truth about RV parks. They're not just places of rest. They're thresholds. Thin lines between the world we know and something vast and unspeaking. The further I traveled, the more I realized the land remembers. The parks are built on old grounds, borrowed grounds, places that belonged to something else long before campers rolled in with their folding chairs and string lights. And sometimes the land wants to remind us. By the time I reached Michigan, I wasn't the same man. I locked doors not out of habit, but out of fear. I walked campsites scanning shadows instead of admiring sunsets, and still it wasn't enough. Because one night, near the Upper Peninsula, I parked at a site by the water's edge, the lake still as glass. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find peace there. But peace doesn't come when you expect it. It comes in fragments, stolen between storms. That night, as I sat by the water, the mist thickened, curling low across the ground. I leaned closer to the fire, watching the embers pop, and then I heard footsteps, wet, deliberate squelching through mud. I turned toward the lake. Shapes emerged from the mist, one after another, pale figures walking in silence toward the shore. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. I knew their eyes even without seeing them. I stumbled back, heart racing, breath ragged. The figures walked into the water, one by one, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple. And when the last one vanished, the mist thinned, leaving only the firelight and the still lake. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, because deep down, I understood. The parks aren't haunted by accidents or tragedies alone. They're haunted by repetition, by patterns that replay over and over, dragging in whoever's unlucky enough to stop for the night. And I was part of it now. There comes a point on the road when exhaustion and fear blend into something harder to name. You stop trusting your own senses. You question whether you're carrying ghosts with you instead of leaving them behind. That's where I was when I rolled into West Virginia one late autumn evening, the hills lined with skeletal trees, their branches like black veins against the bruised sky. The RV park was nearly empty. Just a few rigs scattered at the far end, most of them dark, curtains drawn. The air had a weight to it, heavy with the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke that didn't seem to come from anywhere in particular. I picked a spot near the back, close to a ridge where the forest pressed tight. The silence felt deliberate, as if the world itself were holding its breath. I tried to ground myself in routine, set out a chair, lit a small fire, cooked a simple meal. But even as I ate, I kept glancing toward the tree line. The shadows there seemed thicker, as if they had edges that shifted whenever I looked too long. At one point, I could swear I saw a figure standing between two trees, unmoving. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I told myself I was tired, that road weariness had me seeing things. But later that night, as I lay in bed, the knocking began again. Slow, measured at the side window this time. I clenched my teeth, refusing to move. Then came another knock, this time at the rear window. Then the door. 3 points, one after another, as if something was circling, testing me. My pulse hammered in my ears. I pulled the blanket tight around me, every muscle screaming not to make a sound. The knocks grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the whole RV was quivering. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for my flashlight and, against every instinct, yanked the blinds open. Nothing. No one. Just the dark trees swaying in a breeze that hadn't been there a second ago. I let out a shaky breath, lowered the blind, and that's when I saw it. A reflection in the glass, not mine, a face pressed close on the other side, pale and grinning. By the time I spun around, the window was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn broke, I drove out without looking back, gravel spitting under my tires. But fear doesn't loosen once it's dug in. It followed me to Kentucky. The park there was larger, well-kept, the kind of place families frequented, with playgrounds and a swimming pool long drained for the season. It should have felt safe. But safety is just another story we tell ourselves. The first night, I dreamed I was walking barefoot through the sites, but none of the RVs had doors, just gaping frames, each one darker than the last. From inside came whispers, layered over one another, voices that grew sharper the closer I drew. When I woke, my feet were dirty, smeared with dust and grit, though I hadn't stepped outside. On the second night, I locked everything tight, shades drawn, doors bolted, vents sealed. I even set a kitchen knife within reach of my bed. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of children laughing. The sound rolled across the park like a tide, shrill, joyous, echoing. But when I peered through the blinds, the playground was empty, the swings motionless. The laughter didn't fade. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from right outside my door. Then, footsteps, small, pattering, circling the RV. My chest heaved, panic clawing at my ribs. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles burned. A shadow passed across the window, low to the ground, too quick. Then another, then a dozen. The RV rocked slightly, as if small hands were pushing against it, testing its weight. I snapped. I screamed into the night, slamming the knife against the table. "Leave me alone!" The sound tore through the silence. And just like that, the laughter stopped. The footsteps ceased. The air turned still again. But the quiet was worse. It felt heavy, waiting, as if the dark itself was listening. I left at first light, trembling, ashamed at how close I'd come to stepping outside. Some part of me knew that's what it wanted. For me to leave the safety of thin walls to meet whatever waited in the open. By the time I reached Tennessee, panic was stitched into me. I drove longer hours, stopped less often, choosing bigger crowded parks whenever I could. But one night, I had no choice. The sun was dropping fast, rain hammering the windshield, wipers smearing mud across the glass. I spotted a faded sign promising hookups ahead and pulled in, desperate. The park was nearly empty. Only one other RV sat in the lot, its lights off, windows dark. The rain turned the gravel into rivers, the air electric with the smell of ozone. I parked, plugged in, and collapsed inside, soaked to the bone. For a while, the storm drowned everything out. But storms pass, and when the rain slowed to a drizzle, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not inside. Outside. Deep, ragged breaths dragging along the walls of the RV, circling. My throat tightened. I turned off the lights, crouched low, holding my breath to listen. The breathing moved past the windows, then to the door. It paused there, long enough that I could hear the faintest rasp like a throat clogged with water. Then, slowly, the handle began to turn. I lunged forward, slammed the deadbolt hard. The handle jerked again, harder this time. I pressed my back to the door, my entire body shaking. The breathing grew louder, furious, filling every corner of the RV. Then came the pounding, fists, palms, I don't know, slamming against the walls, the windows, the roof. The whole rig shook under the assault. I thought I was going to die. I thought the thin walls would split and whatever was outside would pour in. I screamed until my throat shredded, screamed louder than I ever had in my life. And then it stopped. Just silence. The kind that isn't empty, but coiled. Waiting. I stayed pressed against that door until dawn, when pale light finally bled through the blinds. When I opened them, the other RV was gone. No tire marks, no sign it had ever been there. The lot was empty, the gravel undisturbed. That was when I understood something I hadn't before. Fear isn't just in the parks, in the trees, in the fields. Fear travels. It waits at the next stop, the next empty lot, the next ridge where the forest presses close. And once it's marked you, once you've heard it breathing, once you've seen its reflection where it shouldn't be, there's no outrunning it. After Tennessee, I promised myself I'd keep moving, never linger more than one night in any park. It was the only way I could breathe without feeling the weight of something pressing down on me. But fear doesn't respect rules, it just waits for its moment. And mine came in Arkansas, at a park so deep in the woods the GPS nearly lost me. I remember pulling in at dusk. The sites were lined along a narrow gravel loop, each one tucked between towering pines that made the evening light bleed away faster than it should have. A thin fog clung to the ground, drifting across the campsites like smoke. I chose the first open spot, thinking it would be safest near the entrance. But safety, I'd learned, was just another story we tell ourselves. The office was locked, dark inside. A handwritten note taped to the door said, "Pick a site, pay in the morning." Something about the crooked letters made my stomach twist, like the words themselves had been rushed, desperate. Still, I parked, plugged in, and cooked a small meal. The fog thickened, swallowing sound, muffling even the crackle of my own fire. By 9, the campground was silent. No other rigs, no cars pulling in late, no footsteps on gravel, just me and the fog. I tried to read, but the words on the page swam. My eyes kept sliding to the window, where pale shapes seemed to shift in the mist. At first, I thought it was just the fog itself moving, but then I saw it, shadows walking between the trees, faint, half-formed, yet moving with purpose. 1, 2, 3. I shut the blinds, turned on every light, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the silence pressed too close, so I turned on the radio. Static. Every channel. My phone showed no service. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in my chest. That's when the knocking started. Soft at first, like fingertips against the door, then louder, heavier, until the whole RV shuddered. I shouted into the night, demanded whoever it was to leave me alone. But the knocking only grew louder, faster, until it was everywhere at once, on the windows, the roof, the walls. I clamped my hands over my ears, tears blurring my vision. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I held my breath, waiting. The silence was worse than the noise, a silence so deep it felt like the world had vanished. Then I heard it, a whisper. My name, drawn long and thin, slithering through the air vents. David, I froze, every muscle locked. The whisper came again, closer, layered, as if more than one voice was speaking at once. David, open the door. My hand drifted toward the lock, trembling mind screaming against itself. It would be so easy. Just open it. Just step into the fog. But another voice, my own this time, clawed up through the panic. Don't you dare. I backed away, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. And then I saw movement. The handle. It began to turn, slow, deliberate. The deadbolt held, but the pressure grew. Metal groaned, wood creaked. I pressed my back against the door, fighting it with every ounce of strength, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken since I was a child. The pressure stopped, the handle stilled, and then laughter. Low, broken, rising from beneath the floor, just like Oregon, only louder, more insistent. My own laughter, echoing through the vents. I screamed, begging it to stop. The sound rattled through the RV, filling every corner until I thought the walls themselves would split. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember when it ended. But I woke to dawn light bleeding through the blinds, every muscle stiff, my throat raw from screaming. The fog was gone, the woods were still. But in the gravel outside my door, pressed deep into the earth, were footprints. Not shoes, not boots. Bare feet, dozens of them, circling, stopping at the steps, toes pointing inward. I didn't pay in the morning. I didn't stop at the office. I drove until the gas tank nearly emptied, until the sun was high, until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the wheel steady. But even then, fear stayed with me. It waited in reflections, in the quiet between radio stations, in the way shadows gathered too quickly at dusk. And it followed me all the way to Oklahoma, where the last straw came. The park there was wide and open, no trees, no fog, just flat land stretching to the horizon. I thought maybe that emptiness would bring relief, that without woods pressing in, I could finally rest. But emptiness has its own dangers. There's nothing to block what comes crawling out of the dark. That night, I sat outside beneath the stars. The firelight flickered, the prairie stretched quiet. For a moment, I felt calm. Then I heard it, a sound I'll never forget. Not footsteps, not whispers. Breathing. Right behind me. I spun, heart in my throat. Nothing. Just firelight dancing over empty ground. I told myself it was my imagination, the echo of my own lungs. I sat back down, forced a laugh. That's when I felt it. Hot breath against the back of my neck. I bolted inside, slammed the door, locked it, collapsed against the wall. My whole body shook. The breathing followed, slow, heavy, sliding across the windows, dragging around the RV, circling me like a predator. And then came the voices. Not whispers this time, shouts. My name, over and over, screamed from every side. David! David! The RV rocked as fists pounded the walls, the roof, the door. I pressed my hands over my ears, sobbing, every nerve on fire. The pounding grew louder, the shouting harsher, until it felt like the rig would split in two. I snapped. I grabbed the keys, started the engine, and floored it. Gravel sprayed, tires screamed, the RV lurched forward. I didn't care if I hit something. I didn't care if I wrecked. I just drove, pedal pressed to the floor, until the park lights disappeared, until the horizon swallowed me whole. Even then, the voices chased me. For miles, I swore I could still hear them, carried on the wind, echoing in the hum of the engine. Only when the sun rose, painting the prairie gold, did they finally fade. And I knew then I wasn't just running from parks. I was running from something older, deeper, something stitched into the land itself, something that didn't care about walls or wheels or locks, something that wanted me and maybe always had. After Oklahoma, I thought maybe I'd reached the edge of what fear could do to a man. My hands shook every time I gripped the wheel. My breath came shallow whenever night crept close. I kept telling myself, one more state, one more road, one more park, and maybe I'd find a place untouched by whatever had followed me. But the road isn't mercy, it's memory. It remembers where you've been, and sometimes it leads you right back to what you tried to escape. In Nebraska, I pulled into a roadside park dusk. Wide open land, not a tree in sight, just flat earth and the hiss of the wind cutting across it. I thought the emptiness might soothe me. No forest to hide in, no fog to coil around my rig, no shadows pressing too close, just open sky. But that night, I learned that emptiness has its own way of devouring you. The park was deserted. Not another RV, not a single light across the long row of sites. The office sat dark, windows boarded as if it hadn't been used in years. But the power hookups worked, and exhaustion won over instinct. I parked, plugged in, cooked something small, and tried to convince myself this was just another night. Around midnight, I woke to silence. Not ordinary silence, something deeper. No wind, no hum of electricity through the hookups, not even the faint creak of the RV settling. It was as if sound itself had been swallowed. I lay there, straining, ears ringing from the absence. Then I felt it. The RV shifted. Not from wind, not from settling, from weight, as though something had climbed onto the roof. My pulse throbbed in my temples, hot and sharp. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The weight pressed across the ceiling, slow, dragging until it stopped directly above me. And then came the sound, a low scrape like nails across metal, deliberate, slow. My skin went ice cold. I bit down hard to keep from making a sound. The scrape moved to the vents, and from there, breath, hot, wet breath seeping through, coating my face in damp heat. My body convulsed with panic. I snapped. I grabbed the flashlight, bolted for the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine roared, but even over it, I heard a laugh, my own laugh, echoing from the roof, broken, distorted. I slammed the accelerator, the RV lurching forward across gravel and into the empty highway. The weight shifted once, then was gone. I didn't look back, but the road didn't free me. 2 nights later, in South Dakota, I stopped at another park. This one had campers, families, kids running between rigs, lanterns glowing, fires crackling. It felt alive, safe the way parks are supposed to. I told myself maybe, finally, I'd shaken it. That night I sat by my fire, listening to the chatter of neighbors. The laughter carried warm through the night air, steady, real. But as it grew late, one by one, the other fires burned down. The voices faded, curtains drew, doors shut, until only my fire remained. The silence settled heavy. Then, faint at first, I heard it. Laughter again, but wrong. Stretched, hollow, twisting the edges of the sound. I froze, listening. It wasn't coming from the neighbors. It was coming from the trees beyond the park, carrying low and broken through the dark. I stood, heart pounding, scanning the shadows. Shapes flickered there, half seen, pale, moving with jerks like marionettes cut loose from strings. I stumbled back into the RV, slammed the door, locked it tight. The laughter followed, circling the rig, layering, until I couldn't tell how many voices there were. Some sounded like strangers. Some sounded like people I'd met on the road. And one of them sounded exactly like me. The pounding started again, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. I screamed, begged it to stop. My hands clawed at my scalp as if I could tear the sound out of my skull. And then, in the midst of it, came words. Clear, cold, from every direction at once. Let us in. My mind snapped. I threw myself into the driver's seat, engines screaming to life, headlights cutting through the night. I didn't care if I hit another rig, didn't care if I tore the hookups out of the ground. I drove. Tires spitting gravel, fire still burning behind me. I drove until the park was gone, until the laughter faded into the roar of the engine. I didn't stop. Not until dawn broke across the horizon. I pulled onto a dirt road, killed the engine, and sat there, shaking, sobbing, hands bleeding from gripping the wheel so tight. And in that raw moment, one thought sank like stone into my chest. It isn't the parks. It isn't the trees or the fog or the empty plains. It's the road itself. The road carries it. Every mile I drive, every place I stop, it's already there, waiting. I sat in that silence for hours, the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing against the glass, and for the first time, I realized there might not be an escape. Not from the whispers, not from the laughter, not from the pounding that still echoed in my bones. That was the moment panic shifted into something darker. Not just fear of what waited outside, but fear of myself. Fear that one night I'd lose the fight, that I'd open the door, step out into the dark, and never come back. After South Dakota, something inside me broke. The road no longer felt like freedom. It felt like a trap, a looping corridor I couldn't escape. Every park I entered seemed like another room in the same endless house, the same shadows just rearranged. I told myself maybe I could outdrive it, put in the miles, cross state lines, leave the darkness behind. But when you carry fear inside you, distance only drags it along. Montana was next. Vast skies, jagged peaks, air so sharp it stung my lungs. I told myself maybe the scale of it would drown out what followed me. The RV park there was small, tucked at the base of the mountains with a stream running close by. The sound of rushing water should have been comfort, a reminder of life moving, of time carrying me forward. Instead, it only sharpened the quiet. That night, I sat by the stream, watching moonlight cut silver across the current. The water moved fast, tumbling over rocks, a steady roar in the dark, and then underneath it, I heard something else, a voice, thin, faint, carried in the rush. I leaned closer, straining. The stream rose and fell with syllables broken but unmistakable, my name. Over and over, buried in the water. David. The sound tangled with the current, twisting between words I couldn't quite catch, like a language just beyond hearing. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The voice grew louder, as if the stream itself had become a mouth. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it pressed through, wet and insistent. Panic surged. I bolted into the RV, slammed the door, locked it, trembling. Still, the voice poured through the vents, layered in water's roar, repeating, demanding. I drove again. No sleep, no pause, just highway, endless and consuming. My eyes burned, my chest ached, but I didn't care. I thought if I kept moving, maybe I could break through to someplace untouched. But the road has no untouched places left. In Idaho, I stopped only because the tank was near empty and my hands shook too hard to keep control. The park I found was deserted, just rows of empty sites, grass grown high between cracked slabs of concrete. The office was boarded, the windows busted. It felt less like a park and more like a grave, but I had no choice. I parked, killed the engine, and sat in silence, chest tight. The air was cold, carrying the smell of rust and earth. I tried to breathe, tried to tell myself it was just another night, but when darkness fell, the quiet deepened into something unbearable. The first sound came around midnight, a dragging like something heavy pulled across gravel. I held still listening. It circled the RV, slow, deliberate, scraping deeper grooves each time. My breath came shallow, each inhale catching. Then, beneath the floor, the laughter started again. My laughter, louder this time, booming, shaking the frame. I pressed my palms to my ears, screaming, but it bled through, warped and broken, and then layered within it another sound. Sobbing. My own voice again, crying, pleading. The two sounds tangled together, laughter and weeping, until I couldn't tell which one was mine anymore. Something inside me cracked. I grabbed the keys, burst into the driver's seat, and twisted hard. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. Headlights cut across the cracked concrete, revealing something that made my blood freeze. Every sight around me, empty when I'd arrived, was now filled, not with RVs, with shapes. Dozens of them, standing still, facing me, pale faces catching the light, eyes black hollows. They didn't move. They didn't need to. The weight of their gaze pressed into me, crushing, suffocating. I screamed, slammed the accelerator. The rig lurched, bounced hard over the broken lot, headlights slicing through figures that seemed to dissolve as I barreled forward. I didn't stop, not even when the wheels screamed over the edge of the gravel and hit dirt. I just drove, blind, tears streaming until the park was gone. By then, I was beyond panic. My mind was a storm, my body raw from the constant fight to survive nights that didn't want me alive. Every shadow was suspect, every sound an enemy. I thought about pulling over, about leaving the rig and walking into the fields, into the mountains, into anything that wasn't metal and fiberglass. But another thought always stopped me. If I left, I'd never come back. So I drove, through night, through exhaustion, through landscapes that blurred into one endless smear of road and sky. Until I reached Washington. Until I parked at the edge of the Olympic Peninsula, the last piece of land before the ocean swallowed everything. I told myself this was it. If the road was a trap, if fear was inescapable, then maybe the sea would be the end of it. Maybe here, at the edge of everything, I could finally find silence. But silence isn't freedom. It's the deepest snare of all. That night, as I sat by the waves, the tide pulled in, carrying with it a sound that was no sound at all. Not laughter, not whispers, something vaster, deeper, rising from the water itself. The ocean didn't say my name, it said all names, voices stacked in impossible layers, rolling with the tide, endless and absolute. I fell to my knees in the sand, ears bleeding from the weight of it, tears burning down my face. Panic surged through me like fire, a final, consuming blaze. I ran back to the RV, slammed the door, locked it, though what lock could ever hold back the ocean? The voices followed, pouring through the glass, through the walls, through my very bones. And in that moment, I knew. There was no running left. No park safe enough, no distance far enough. The road had brought me here for a reason. Every mile, every night, every knock and whisper had led to this shore. The voices at the shore didn't stop that night. They poured in with every wave, seared themselves into me with every pull of the tide. I curled in the driver's seat, shaking, whispering to myself just to hear my own voice over theirs. I don't know when exhaustion finally pulled me under, but when I woke, dawn had broken. The ocean lay calm, its surface glittering gold beneath the rising sun. The voices were gone, as if they'd never been there at all. I staggered out of the RV and onto the beach. The sand was untouched, no footprints, no drag marks, no evidence that anything had moved along that shore except me. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been in my head, that I'd finally gone mad. And maybe that's the cruelest part of fear. It makes you question not only the world, but yourself. But when I looked back at my RV, I saw something carved into the condensation on the window. Just 3 words, traced by a finger that shouldn't have been there. We found you. I collapsed in the sand, a sob tearing out of me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours, time had no meaning. Eventually, I dragged myself back inside, turned the key, and drove until the ocean was behind me. But the message burned into me. It wasn't about places. It wasn't about parks or forests or rivers. It was about me. I had been marked, claimed by something older than asphalt or firelight, something that travels not on roads, but in silence, in echoes, in the space between heartbeats. For weeks after, I couldn't bring myself to stop at any park. I slept in truck stops, in rest areas on the shoulder of forgotten roads. But it didn't matter. The knocking came anyway. Sometimes soft, sometimes violent, but always there. The laughter followed too, weaving in and out of my own. And every so often in the static of the radio or the rush of passing wind, I heard the voices calling my name. At first, I fought it. Slammed fists against walls, screamed into the night, begged whatever it was to leave me alone. But anger only made it louder. Panic only fed it. I realized then that escape wasn't possible. What mattered wasn't running. What mattered was enduring. That's the part no one tells you about fear. It isn't just a monster in the dark, a shadow outside your window. Fear is a teacher. Cruel, relentless, but a teacher all the same. It strips you of illusions, forces you to face yourself in ways comfort never could. I'd spent years believing RV parks were safe havens, little circles of light against the dark, But safety is never a guarantee. It's a story we tell ourselves. And sometimes that story crumbles. I think about the people I've met along the road, the owners who averted their eyes, the campers who whispered warnings, the ones who seemed to know but never spoke. Maybe they'd seen it too. Maybe they'd learned, like me, that some truths can't be shared without being carried. Fear isn't contagious like a sickness. It's heavier than that. When you speak it, you pass some of the weight to whoever listens, and maybe that's why so many stay quiet. But silence doesn't save anyone. It only isolates, and I refuse to let my silence be the end of me. That's why I tell this story. Not to scare you away from the road, not to drive you out of your RV and back into the safe, sterile corners of life. I tell it because the road is real and what waits out there is real, and you have to know what it means to step into it. The campfire isn't just warmth, it's a line drawn against the dark, a fragile line, and one you can't take for granted. If you hear knocking at your door at midnight, think twice before you open it. If the wind carries your name from the trees, don't answer. If laughter rises from beneath your floor, don't let it convince you it's your own. And if you ever find yourself staring at fog that seems to shift with shapes, remember, you're not imagining it. You're not crazy. You're just seeing what's already there. The road will test you. It will strip you bare. It will force you to face the kind of silence that makes you doubt your own breath. And when it does, you'll have two choices: break or endure. I chose to endure. Not because I'm brave, not because I don't still feel the tremor of panic every time night falls and the shades are drawn. I endure because the road is who I am. Because for all its terrors, there is beauty here too. The kind of beauty you only see when you've sat awake through the worst nights and watched dawn claw its way back over the horizon. Fear doesn't end. It lingers, it waits, it presses in at the edges. But so does light. And if you've ever sat by a fire in the middle of nowhere, with only the stars above and the hum of your own breath in your ears, you know that both can exist together. That's what I hold on to now. Not the illusion of safety, but the truth of endurance. The understanding that even when the road whispers, even when the knocking starts, even when voices claw through the vents and the laughter turns into my own, I am still here. I am still breathing. And as long as I keep breathing, the road hasn't won. So when you pull into a park, when you set out your chair and light your fire, remember this: the dark is watching. It always has been. But so long as you sit in the glow, so long as you keep your eyes open and your heart steady, you are not lost. I've lived to tell this story not because I outran the fear, but because I learned to carry it. And maybe that's the only lesson the road ever meant to teach. I've guided hikers through the Sierra Nevada for nearly a decade, tracing every trail from the low foothills up to the ragged, snow-dusted ridges. I've seen sudden storms sweep entire valleys into white oblivion, witnessed lightning slice open the sky, and felt the forest hum with wildlife in ways that make a person feel insignificant. But nothing I'd encountered prepared me for that morning, or whatever it was that arrived when the wind went silent. We were hiking a backcountry route east of Donner Pass, a trail I had memorized so well I could lead a group blindfolded. The snow had been light the night before, thinly dusting the firs, giving the forest a delicate, quiet sheen. I remember the way the air smelled then, cold, metallic, and faintly sweet, like ozone after a storm that hadn't yet come. We'd left camp early. My group was small, just 3 paying clients, and I wanted to be above the tree line before the clouds thickened. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up, flurries beginning to bite at our faces. I could see the jagged peaks through the swirling white, my experience telling me the storm was local and transient. I led the group across a narrow snowpack ridge, my boots crunching on frozen ice under the thin snow. It was here, on that ridge, that I first noticed it, the absence of the usual forest sounds. No wind whipping the pines, no distant bird calls, even the occasional rustle of a squirrel had vanished. There was only a kind of hollow, suspended quiet that pressed into my chest and made me conscious of each breath. I stopped. The clients looked at me, puzzled, shoving gloved hands into their jackets. "Is it always this quiet here?" one asked. I shrugged, though my heart had already started hammering. I couldn't explain it. Normally, the ridges carried sound even against the wind. The forest is rarely so completely muted. But here, it was as though the world had swallowed itself whole. I took a step forward and felt it. The snow, or rather, how it was falling. It wasn't falling. I froze. The fine flakes that had danced around our heads moments before were now moving upward, curling against the thin air, drifting as though drawn toward an invisible point somewhere above. My clients didn't seem to notice at first, but when I pointed it out, one of them laughed nervously. "It's just the wind, right?" he said, voice cracking slightly. I opened my mouth, but no explanation came. The wind wasn't moving. The trees weren't swaying. The snow was defying gravity, spiraling up like smoke from some unseen fire. Something in the air shifted then. I felt it before I saw it. A vibration, low, almost imperceptible at first, running through the soles of my boots, lying up my legs into my spine. The ridge beneath us seemed to pulse subtly, like the earth was breathing beneath frozen feet. I looked at my compass out of habit. Nothing abnormal, but the needle wobbled just slightly, then steadied. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. I instructed the group to move quickly down the ridge toward lower ground. Every step felt sluggish, like wading through a dense, invisible water. The snow continued its impossible ascent, and the silence. God, the silence was unbearable. Even the clink of ice against trekking poles sounded muffled, as if the world had wrapped itself in layers of soundproof cloth. I glanced at the tree line and froze again. The forest, usually thick with pines, seemed hollowed out. Shadows stretched longer than they should, slanting in directions that made no sense, bending around trunks and rocks like water flowing over submerged stones. We descended, cautiously at first, then faster as the unnatural stillness began to gnaw at my nerves. That's when I saw the tracks. Not just footprints, but a series of impressions that shouldn't exist in snow this deep. They were elongated, uneven, like a predator's gait, but the spacing and depth made no sense for any creature I knew. No bear, no mountain lion, no human could have left prints like that. And yet they were there, leading into the hollowed forest, vanishing between the trees as if swallowed by the snow itself. I tried to maintain calm for my clients, forcing my voice steady even as my hands shook. "We stick to the trail," I said. "No deviations." But the trail was gone, or at least obscured. The snow had drifted unevenly, covering familiar markers. My mental map faltered. Something about the ridge, the forest, even the angle of the mountains felt wrong. By mid-afternoon, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in thick plumes, and the clients began shivering despite layered gear. We needed shelter, and I knew of an abandoned ranger cabin a few miles east. It was small, neglected, but it could shield us from the snow and whatever else lingered outside. The descent took longer than expected. Every step was heavy, the snow sucking at our boots. And all the while, the silence persisted, broken only by the unnatural hiss of snow climbing into the sky. I remember the smell first, burnt wood, faint and acrid, though the cabin had no fire. Then the door, sticking at the frame, scraping like fingernails across metal. Inside, dust coated the surfaces thickly, and the air smelled like decay and wet pine. I lit a small stove, just enough to take the chill off, but the glow felt inadequate against the oppressive quiet outside. My clients huddled near it, whispering nervously, and I sat back against the wall, straining to hear any sign of the world beyond the cabin. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from above, not from the roof, not from the walls, but from the snow itself. Tap, tap, tap. The sound grew, slow at first, then erratic, like a creature testing boundaries, walking carefully across some invisible plane. I pressed my ear to the window, my breath fogging the glass. There was nothing to see. Only snow drifting upward, the forest frozen in impossible geometry. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by an echoing silence that seemed louder than before. The clients were trembling now. One of them muttered, "I just want to go home." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. But leaving wasn't an option. The ridge behind us had vanished under snow and strange shadows. The tracks we'd seen earlier seemed to loop back toward us in impossible angles, as though the forest itself had reshuffled its geometry to trap us. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I knew better. Panic in the Sierra Nevada is a slow death. A wrong step, a misjudged drift, a hidden cornice could end everything. I spent the night trying to stay awake, listening, watching, convinced that anything I closed my eyes would reach through the silence. The stove hissed, the flames crackled faintly, and outside the snow continued to defy gravity, spiraling upward in a slow, mesmerizing rhythm. I remember thinking over and over that this was impossible, that my mind was breaking, but the clients were awake too, and their terror was real, shared, undeniable. That lent it an eerie credibility I couldn't shake. By morning, the wind returned, but not normally. It blew hot and cold in unpredictable bursts, rattling the cabin and distorting the snow's direction. When I stepped outside, I realized the ridge behind us was gone entirely, replaced by a hollow valley I had never seen, as though the mountains themselves had shifted in the night. My map, my compass, even the trail markers were useless, and the tracks, every single one had disappeared, leaving no trace that we had ever been followed at all. We eventually stumbled back to a main trail, hours later, guided only by instinct and the sun's position. The clients were shaken, silent, unable to recount more than fragmented impressions of the snow moving upward or the hollow shadows. I didn't try to explain it. There is no explanation I can give that would make sense. Even now, months later, I dream about that ridge, that unnatural snow, and the feeling of something ancient and intelligent watching from the forest, waiting for silence. I have photographs, grainy and indistinct, showing snow drifting at impossible angles. My journal entries describe tracks that vanished into the sky. I keep them hidden because if anyone believed them, they'd think me insane, or worse, expose the truths the mountains do not allow spoken. And still, sometimes when the wind dies, I feel it. The silence curling into the air, the snow defying gravity, the sensation of being watched, measured, tested. I cannot tell anyone where it happened, not the exact ridge, not the forest that swallowed our path. The Sierra Nevada keeps its secrets well. I survived. But part of me stayed behind, in that hollowed forest where the wind went silent, and I know I will hear the tapping again one day when the snow rises and the air holds its breath. The days after the ridge incident were deceptively ordinary, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I returned to my home in Truckee, the familiar hum of traffic and the scent of pine from my backyard a fragile balm. Yet even in the town's normalcy, the memory of that hollowed snow, those impossible tracks, and the eerie silence clung to me. I avoided guiding clients for a while, citing a minor knee injury, but the truth was I was afraid to step back into the wilderness that had seemed so familiar, only to reveal itself as something else entirely. Work eventually called me back. A small group wanted a 3-day trek along a less traveled route in the Carson Pass area. I hesitated at first, thinking of the ridge, but I couldn't stop. Being in the mountains is like breathing. The pull is inexorable. The clients were inexperienced hikers, 2 college students and a man in his 50s, keen on escaping their routines. I packed carefully, double-checking ropes, maps, and emergency radios. I reminded myself constantly, no ridge like that, no hollowed forest, no upward falling snow. It was impossible, and impossible was safer left unthought. The first day was ordinary, painfully so. The sun carved shadows across the trails, birds called intermittently, and a thin wind carried the scent of wet fur and decomposing leaves. I focused on keeping the clients in sight, maintaining a rhythm that would prevent panic if weather shifted. But as we ascended, I noticed something familiar, a subtle thickening in the air, like it had weight. It wasn't a gust or a drop in temperature. It was a presence, almost tactile, pressing lightly against our senses. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing near a creek I knew well. I stopped the group to rest, letting them drink and eat while I scouted ahead. That's when I saw the first hint of abnormality: the snow. It hadn't started falling, but patches clung stubbornly to branches in ways that defied gravity. Needles pointed downward, yet the snow held tight, forming small bulges like frozen glass. I knelt to examine it, brushing my gloved hand across a branch. The flakes didn't fall. My skin prickled, and I stepped back quickly, muttering to myself. The clients didn't notice, or chose not to, but I could feel their presence at my back, expectant, uneasy. Night fell rapidly, the sun sinking behind jagged peaks, painting the clouds a dull orange before darkness swallowed them. I led the group to a small grove to set camp, careful to avoid the low ridges that might conceal treacherous cornices. As we worked to erect tents and start a fire, I felt it again, that subtle vibration underfoot, a rhythm like something pacing just beyond vision. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an underground stream or frost settling in the soil. But even as I whispered these explanations aloud, the rational part of me shrank back. Sleep that night was restless. I lay in my tent, the clients snoring softly around me, but the forest outside felt alive in a new, terrifying way. The wind had ceased entirely, not a whisper, not a single leaf stirring, and the snow, even here, far below the ridge from before, the snow began moving, upward, curling slowly into the night sky like smoke rising from a fire no one tended. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced it was exhaustion. But when I looked again, it hadn't stopped. It was hypnotic, unnatural, and horrifying in its quiet persistence. I left the tent under the pretense of checking fire lines. My boots sank slightly into the packed snow, crunching faintly against the still air. That's when I saw the tracks again, elongated, uneven, pacing along the edges of our clearing. They were fresh, but no animal could make such impressions. Each print seemed calculated, deliberate, aware. My heartbeat quickened. I wanted to call out, to alert the clients, but a sudden thought froze me. If it could create these tracks, if it could manipulate the snow, would it respond to my voice? I spent what felt like hours circling the clearing, trying to track the prints without approaching them too closely. The forest remained unnervingly silent, the trees frozen mid-motion. The moon had risen, casting thin silver light that barely penetrated the dense canopy. And then I heard it, the tapping, subtle at first like a branch settling, but closer this time, rhythmic, deliberate. It wasn't coming from the treetops or the ground. It was everywhere at once, surrounding me. I returned to camp, heart pounding, trying to speak normally to my clients. They noticed nothing. I forced a smile, shoved the anxiety down, and attempted to start the fire. It sputtered to life, a weak shield against the overwhelming stillness outside. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the tracks circling the tents, the snow rising around us in silent defiance of the world I thought I knew. By dawn, the forest had changed further. Paths I remembered were gone. Creeks had shifted slightly, stones displaced in impossible arrangements, and the snow was climbing again, upward in slow, mesmerizing spirals. I called the clients together, insisting we descend. We packed quickly, but I couldn't shake the sense that the forest was aware of our movements, that it had been watching all along, measuring our pace, our fear, our attempts at rational thought. We made slow progress down the slope, slipping on icy patches, every step heavy with an unspoken dread. Then I saw movement, shadows that didn't belong, shifting along the tree line in ways the light shouldn't allow. No sound, just form. I froze, a sudden cold paralyzing me. The shadows mirrored our movements, but never directly, never predictably. They were not animals, not people, not any creature I had seen. My mouth was dry, but I spoke anyway. Keep going, don't look back. A few hours later, after what felt like an eternity of careful descent, the forest opened slightly. A familiar ridge appeared, one I recognized from older maps. Relief flooded me briefly, only to be replaced by unease. The ridge looked wrong. Angles were sharper, the snow piled in unnatural drifts, and the light seemed bent, refracted in ways that made distance and depth impossible to judge. I called a halt, telling the group to rest and check gear. I moved slightly ahead, trying to see the correct trail. And then I heard it, A voice, faint, indistinct, carried in the wind, or perhaps not carried at all. It was human, I thought, mimicking a whisper I would have made. My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't spoken. My clients were behind me. There was no one there. But the voice, repeating a fragment of my own thoughts, echoed from the forest itself. I spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, no wind. The snow continued to rise. My heart raced, my hands shook. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I couldn't see a path I trusted. The forest was alive in a way I couldn't describe, aware, intelligent, patient. It didn't hunt in the manner of a predator. It tested, observed, eroded our certainty, and wore down my perception until I questioned whether the path had ever existed or if I had imagined it entirely. By mid-afternoon, we reached an old service road, abandoned, winding toward a ranger station. The clients were exhausted, trembling, barely able to speak. I could barely reassure them, my own voice hollow. I dared not mention the snow, the tracks, the voice. Rationality demanded silence. The road was our salvation, our tether back to a world that still obeyed logic and physics. Yet even as we walked, I felt the rhythm beneath my feet, subtle vibrations that whispered through the soles of my boots, reminding me, we had been measured, our fear catalogued, our passage noted. We reached the station after an eternity. The snow had stopped rising, the forest had returned, superficially to normal. Birds called, wind rustled, and sunlight struck the slopes as though nothing had happened. My clients wept with relief, and I forced a weary smile, but I knew better. The forest had shown me something beyond comprehension, beyond memory. And though we had escaped physically, part of me remained, bound to the hollowed spaces, the impossible snow, and the intelligence that watched without revealing itself. I haven't guided on that backcountry route since. I avoid the higher ridges, the hollowed valleys, the places where the wind goes silent. But I hear the tapping sometimes in my own home when the wind dies outside. I see snow climbing up the walls of my mind in dreams, spiraling impossibly, carrying the forest's silent judgment. And I know, as much as I deny it to everyone else, that the Sierra Nevada holds its secrets jealously. And that ridge, that forest, that hollowed place is still out there, waiting for someone to walk its snow-covered paths again. Even after reaching the ranger station, the forest hadn't released me entirely. My clients had moved on, shaken but alive, yet I felt a weight pressing from the back country into my chest, a presence that didn't obey logic or distance. I returned to the ridge once, months later, under the guise of routine trail maintenance. I told myself it was for work, for maps, for signage, but deep down, I knew it was curiosity, or a compulsion I couldn't name. The approach was deceptively familiar. Sunlight fractured through the pine canopy in patterns I remembered from before, yet as I ascended I realized the shapes were off. Rocks tilted at unnatural angles, snow drifts hung in impossible arcs, and the forest floor shifted beneath my feet as if subtly alive. My compass spun briefly, needles jerking in impossible directions, and the air itself hummed with the low, vibrating rhythm I had learned to fear. I caught the first glimpse of it mid-morning. The tracks. They were identical to the ones I had seen before, elongated, uneven, deliberate. They appeared suddenly in fresh snow, leading upward to a ridge I didn't recognize. I tried to reason, perhaps another hiker, an animal, wind. But my instincts screamed. These prints moved with intent. They were not random. They were measured, aware. I followed them cautiously, descending slightly into a hollow where the forest seemed to compress inward, trees bending at subtle, impossible angles. The wind was dead again. Not a single sound moved through the branches. Even my own breathing sounded muted, hollow, as though the air itself had absorbed it. My stomach nodded. I realized then that I wasn't merely observing the forest, I was inside a mechanism, a vast organism that could alter perception, shift the terrain, and manipulate gravity itself. Then I heard the voice, a whisper, faint, carried on no wind, repeating my own thoughts. At first, it mimicked a mundane concern. Which way is the trail? I froze. The whisper grew more deliberate, taunting, which way is the trail? It came from all directions at once. I spun in place, heart hammering. The snow lifted around me, spiraling upward in delicate hypnotic motions. I felt the vibration under my feet intensify, a rhythm of patience and predation. I tried to retreat, backtracking along the ridge, but the hollow shifted subtly with every step. Trails I knew were gone, replaced by corridors of snow and shadow that led nowhere familiar. Panic pressed at my chest, a hot, suffocating weight. My mind raced to rational explanations: altitude, fatigue, hallucination. But even as I tried to dismiss it, the forest demonstrated its awareness. The snow rose faster, forming delicate coils, and the tapping returned, rapid, insistent, almost communicating. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed meaningless. I realized the forest had no concept of conventional geometry or linear progression. It was patient, intelligent, and impossibly old. I stumbled into a hollow, chest deep in snow that should have been shallower. When I finally climbed out, I saw movement at the tree line, a shadow detaching itself from the trees, sliding silently across the snow, pausing, observing. It wasn't a human, not a bear, not a wolf. Its form was wrong, limbs elongated, gait deliberate, and yet it moved with understanding. I froze, whispering reassurances to myself, though my voice sounded alien in the heavy air. The shadow tilted its head, mimicking my posture, then vanished into the forest without a sound. I realized then that this wasn't a predator in the conventional sense. It didn't chase or attack. It tested, it waited, it cataloged. The tracks, the tapping, the voice, it was all part of an assessment, a measurement of human fear and endurance. I stumbled down the ridge, desperate for the safety of familiar terrain, though nothing looked familiar. Eventually, I glimpsed a faint outline of the abandoned ranger cabin from before. Relief washed over me, but caution tempered it. I entered, seeking refuge, and found it empty, dust and decay unchanged. I lit a small stove, warming my hands, and tried to steady my breathing, but even inside, the forest pressed at the walls. The tapping continued, faint but insistent, coming from the snow outside, or perhaps from the air itself. I spent the night awake, recording my observations, marking the direction of tracks and spiraling snow patterns. My hands shook, my eyes burned, and my mind struggled to maintain clarity. I knew I had survived something beyond comprehension. The forest was no longer simply a wilderness. It was a living, calculating presence, an organism with patient intelligence. And I, its visitor, had been measured and released for reasons I would never understand. By dawn, I left the cabin. The forest outside appeared normal, deceptively so. Snow lay in ordinary drifts, the wind moved in gentle gusts, and the sun warmed my back. I retraced my steps to the main trail, finding it intact, navigable, and utterly mundane. Yet I knew better. I had glimpsed the edge of something immense and patient. The ridge, the hollow, the impossible snow, they were still out there, waiting. Months later, I returned to guiding, cautiously, selectively. I avoid backcountry ridges, hollowed valleys, and the places where the wind dies. But sometimes in my own home, in the quiet of the night, I hear the tapping again, subtle, deliberate, patient. I see snow spiraling upward in dreams. I hear fragments of whispers in the wind, repeating my own thoughts, reminding me that the forest's intelligence is patient, precise, and eternal. I survived, but part of me never left that hollowed place. The forest keeps its secrets, and some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be forgotten. I can navigate the Sierra Nevada as I once did, but I do so with the constant awareness that the mountains watch, measure, and wait. That ridge, the snow that climbs, the tracks that defy understanding, is out there. And I know one day it will test someone else in ways that cannot be explained, in ways that cannot be survived unchanged. Even after the incident, life returned outwardly to a semblance of normalcy. I resumed guiding, answering calls for trails I knew would keep my clients safe, steering clear of ridges that seemed to shift in memory. Friends and coworkers noticed my unease, my hesitant speech when recounting past trips, the way I avoided certain trails, but I never told them the truth. There is no narrative they could understand. How do you explain a forest that watches, measures, and reshapes itself, that whispers fragments of your thoughts and sends snow climbing skyward in silent defiance of gravity? I tried rationality. I pored over maps, checked elevation profiles, retraced routes. Nothing accounted for the ridge that had vanished, the tracks that couldn't exist, or the hollowed forest that tested our fear. I wondered if I had imagined it all, that my mind had fractured in the snow and wind. But the evidence remained. Photographs, grainy and indistinct, showed the upward spinning snow and recorded measurements, sketches, and observations that no one could explain. Even months later, when I looked at them, a chill ran down my spine because I remembered the air, the vibration underfoot, the tapping that persisted as if the world itself had patience far beyond my own. The clients I guided after the incident never noticed anything unusual. Yet sometimes on quiet days, I would catch them glancing at a shadow at the edge of a tree line or a snow patch clinging to a branch in impossible angles. I thought I imagined it, projecting my trauma onto their tentative awareness. But the forest is patient. It waits, it measures, and it uses the cracks in perception as its playground. There were nights when sleep failed me. I would awaken to the sound of faint tapping in my own room, precise and rhythmic, impossible to localize. Dreams carried the upward falling snow, spiraling in infinite patterns around invisible ridges, the hollowed forest stretching out endlessly, aware, calculating, patient. In those dreams, I followed the tracks again and again, never reaching the end, always circling, always observed. I woke with my hands clenched, sweat cooling on my skin, and a sense of being measured lingering in my chest. On certain mornings when the wind dies completely, I feel it again. The presence of the ridge, the hollow, the patient intelligence of the Sierra Nevada that doesn't sleep. I hear fragments of whispers, indistinct, echoing thoughts I have yet to articulate, reminding me that it waits. And the snow, the spiraling, defiant snow, returns in memory so vividly that I can see it climbing even in the city, on ordinary sidewalks, on ordinary rooftops. It is no longer just a forest phenomenon. It is imprinted on perception itself. I know I survived physically, but part of me, the part that trusted instinct, that measured reality against known physics, remains in that hollowed forest. I cannot step into that region without remembering its intelligence, its patience, its ability to disorient and catalog fear. And I will never tell anyone exactly where it is. The maps are useless. The terrain has shifted, and perhaps it has always been waiting to erase certainty, to claim another mind, another perception, another fragment of human understanding. Sometimes, when I guide hikers along safer trails, I catch myself scanning the tree line for impossible angles, for snow that shouldn't cling to branches, for shadows moving deliberately beyond reason. My clients notice nothing. They trust me to lead them safely. I smile, nod, point out harmless features, and inwardly count every heartbeat, every vibration beneath my boots, every whispering wind that could be testing my attention, cataloging my fear. I avoid those ridges. I avoid hollowed valleys. I avoid any snowfield that rises unnaturally in my dreams. Yet I know the forest remains. The patient intelligence I glimpsed, the anomaly in the Sierra Nevada, is eternal, waiting for the next visitor, the next guide, the next soul to measure and test. And I am left with the certainty that the wilderness is not always a passive backdrop. Sometimes it is an entity, patient and meticulous, that shapes perception, manipulates the environment, and leaves its survivors forever changed. There are moments when I hear the tapping, not in the forest, not outside, but in ordinary spaces, my kitchen, my office, even my own bedroom. It is subtle, almost subliminal, enough to make me pause mid-thought. I imagine the upward falling snow, the hollowed forest stretching endlessly, and the shadow that followed us across the ridges, watching, patient, cataloging fear like a predator cataloging prey. I do not know what became of the ridge, the tracks, the hollowed forest. Officially, it is simply part of the Sierra Nevada's wilderness, a remote, beautiful, and treacherous region. But I know differently. I have carried its imprint in my mind, in my perception, in my dreams. The anomaly exists, patient, intelligent, unyielding. It waits silently for the next human to wander where they should not, to misstep, to falter in perception. I survived. I returned to the world of maps, trails, and guiding clients safely along familiar paths. Yet part of me remains in that hollowed place, measured and cataloged by something beyond comprehension. The snow spirals upward in memory, the tapping echoes faintly in quiet spaces. The whispering fragments of thoughts remind me that the forest watches. And one day, perhaps, it will reach out again, patient, precise, eternal. I have no answers. I have only memories, photographs, and journal entries that cannot be fully explained. And every time the wind dies, every time the world holds its breath, I remember the ridge where the snow climbed, the hollowed forest, and the intelligence that tested us all. I survived, but the forest did not release me, and I know it never will. Alaska's Inside Passage is a place that makes you feel small, even when you're standing on solid ground. I've spent the better part of a decade listening to the chatter of the sea from the radio shack at the edge of Ketchikan. The hum of static, the faint crackle of distant transmissions, the way voices filter through like fragments of another world. This was my domain. I was a marine radio operator, which is to say I was the first point of contact when something went wrong on the water, when a vessel was lost, or when a storm caught someone by surprise. Most of the time, my job was tedious and lonely. The radio channels squealed and hissed, but nobody ever really called for help. And that was the way I liked it, safe, predictable, and with a view of the mist crawling over the fjords. It started on a Tuesday, the sky low and gray, the air sharp with the smell of salt and diesel. My shift began the same way every morning. Check the logs, make sure the antennas were clear of ice, and scan the channels. Nothing unusual at first. Then, at precisely 3:17 p.m., I heard it. The voice came over Channel 9, rough and hesitant, almost swallowed by static. It said my name, my full name. I froze. I've been a radio operator long enough to know that the system doesn't just repeat your name back at you. You either get a call from another operator identifying themselves, or the channel stays silent except for interference. But this was different. "Jonathan, is that you?" the voice rasped. There was a pause, and then it whispered something I couldn't immediately comprehend. I pressed the PTT switch and replied, but only static came back. My hands shook despite the heater humming in the shack, and for a moment I felt the first real chill of unease in months of cold air. I tried to trace the signal, an automatic process, but the reading didn't make sense. The source wasn't anywhere on our charts. It was offshore, somewhere deep in the passage, in waters that had long since claimed vessels. I checked the logs of lost ships, thinking maybe it was an emergency buoy or an old distress signal. Nothing matched. Everything older than 20 years had long since ceased broadcasting, except this voice. It kept calling my name, intermittent now, sometimes drifting in and out like fog rolling across the waves. I shut the station down, thinking I was imagining things. But when I stepped outside, the air seemed heavier, almost charged. The smell of the sea was different, fouled in a way I couldn't describe. Metallic, wet, and slightly sweet, like rusted blood. The water lapped quietly against the dock, too quiet. The inside passage usually roared at this hour, tide against rock, wind off the glaciers. Not today. I went back inside and listened. Channel 9 was silent again, except for faint, rhythmic clicks. It was subtle at first, a pattern almost like Morse code. And then it became words again, clearer this time. Not my name, but a series of fragmented sentences. Storm, not safe. Jonathan, we tried. The voice sounded older now, brittle, fragile, like it had been carried through decades of salt and decay. I began to feel a gnawing in my chest, a slow-burning recognition of something impossible. The words themselves didn't fully make sense, but the cadence, the tone, I knew that ship. The ship that sank in 1973 during a sudden winter gale. My grandfather had been part of the recovery team, and the story had haunted our family. 50 men lost, not a single survivor, and now some impossible remnant of that tragedy was reaching out to me. I called my supervisor, trying to rationalize, to get someone else to listen. Static. No one answered. My radio was the only functioning line, and the voice had stopped. But the sensation of being watched persisted. I checked the cameras outside the shack. Empty docks, empty water. Only mist curling low over the surface, hiding shadows, hiding secrets. I went home that evening, though home meant a small, isolated cabin up a hill, connected by a single snow-slick road. The wind began to howl through the trees as night fell, rattling the walls, scratching at the windows. I tried to sleep, but the voice, soft, rasping, crept into my dreams. It whispered my name again, coaxing me toward something I didn't understand, toward the water, toward them. The next morning, I returned to the shack. The static on Channel 9 was louder than before, almost alive. It wasn't just interference, it pulsed in rhythms that mimicked breathing. And then, clear as if standing right next to me, the voice spoke again. "Jonathan, help us. The fog." I traced the signal. It was moving, sliding across coordinates I didn't recognize. Farther into the inside passage, into waters charted as treacherous, abandoned for commercial navigation. I felt my chest tighten. Rational thought battled instinct. I knew better than to go looking for ghosts in these waters. I knew the currents, the tides, the hidden reefs that could tear a vessel apart in moments. And yet something primal drove me, something that tied my name to that voice and that ship 50 years gone. I prepped a small boat. A local ranger friend had lent it to me years ago for patrols and maintenance. It was nothing more than a 20-foot skiff, outboard motor thrumming weakly in the morning mist. I took a handheld radio with me, Channel 9, on constant scan. My hands were clammy under gloves, but I forced them steady. The voice came again, guiding, pleading. As I moved into the fog, the world changed. The mist wasn't just water vapor. It seemed to breathe, to pulse around me. Sounds warped. The gulls' cries stretched and elongated. My engine sounded wrong, deeper, resonating beneath the hull. The scent of rusted metal and brine grew stronger, wrapping around me. It was disorienting. I wasn't sure where I was, nor how I'd traveled hundreds of meters into a section of the passage that shouldn't be navigable in a craft like mine. Then I saw them. Shapes in the water. Hulks of steel, corroded, leaning at impossible angles. The wreckage of the ship, 50 years of decay, yet somehow intact in the fog as if time had folded on itself. And on the deck, figures, faint, translucent, faces blurred by mist and corrosion, pointing at me, gesturing. The voice was louder now, insistent, almost human in its desperation. I tried to retreat, but the boat didn't respond as it should. The fog had become viscous, holding me in place. The figures reached toward me, silent, mouths moving without sound. My radio screamed in static. And then a single word cut through. "Jonathan." I bolted. Engine screaming, fog tearing around me, the voices following, fragmenting. Hours later, I stumbled back to the dock, exhausted, drenched, trembling. The skiff barely floated and the radio was silent. When I reported the coordinates to the local authorities, nothing was there, just open water, calm as if it had never swallowed a ship. I never went back on the water alone. I avoid Channel 9, but sometimes when the wind shifts a certain way, when the fog creeps low over the fjords, I hear it. My name carried on static, soft, patient, waiting. And I know that the inside passage hasn't forgotten me, or that ship. I'm just the last voice to answer its call. The days after that first encounter were the longest of my life. Even in daylight, the fog seemed to cling to the edges of my vision, curling along tree lines and cliffs like smoke refusing to dissipate. I tried to work, tried to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing, that fatigue and isolation had conjured a hallucination. But every time I opened the shack, every time I keyed the mic to check the channels, I felt the pull again. Channel 9 hummed softly in the background like the low vibration of a buried engine, waiting. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, I wasn't dreaming. I was there on that ghost ship, standing ankle-deep in rusted water with voices calling my name. Sometimes they whispered my grandfather's name too, and I could swear I heard fragments of the ship's log being recited in broken, wet tones. My own memories of family dinners, of my grandfather speaking about the storm that claimed his crew, twisted into something uncanny. The line between memory and this spectral call blurred. I began noticing things around the shack that didn't belong. The mist outside would gather unnaturally thick against the windows, pressing patterns into the glass. Shadows moved where none should have been. Reflections in the control panels, ripples across the water, shapes in the tree line that vanished when I tried to focus. Radios other than Channel 9 picked up fragments too. Faint cries, coughs, static-laced laughter. My colleagues dismissed it when I tried to explain, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They were right to doubt, because no one else could hear it. And yet, I knew I wasn't imagining this. One evening, desperate for understanding, I traced the signal again. The coordinates led me deep into a cluster of fjords, an area charted as impassable except for small local craft. I took the skiff again, reluctant, my hands still trembling from the previous encounter. The mist swallowed me almost immediately, and I felt the same oppressive weight pressing down. The water was unnaturally calm, like glass, but the engine thrummed in resistance as though the waves themselves had formed some kind of barrier. Then I heard it, more clearly than ever. A voice that wasn't just calling me, it was guiding me. "Jonathan, follow. Don't stop." I gripped the wheel tighter, heart hammering, mind fighting the instinct to turn back. The voice led me along jagged passages I'd never mapped, through shallow channels where the rocks threatened to tear the hull apart. I began to notice signs, subtle and almost laughable if I weren't so tense. A floating length of rope, a rusted buoy with numbers I recognized, even a weathered piece of wood from the ship's hull, partially submerged. It was impossible. 50 years should have erased every trace. And yet, each object reinforced a dreadful certainty. I wasn't being lured by the wind or the fog or my imagination. Something alive or something persistent wanted me to find this place. Hours passed. The sun never seemed to rise, though I could feel the faint warmth of daylight trying to push through the mist. And then I saw her. A figure on the wreck. Not a shadow, not a reflection, but a humanoid shape soaked in rust and water leaning against the mangled rail. I froze. The voice came again, fragmented but insistent. "Help, don't let sink." I tried to respond, but my radio squawked only static. My hands shook violently as the skiff drifted closer. The figure's head tilted, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition, or maybe it was my own mind projecting it. The figure raised a hand, and something glimmered in the mist. A locket, corroded yet unmistakably engraved with the initials of one of the lost sailors. The proof I hadn't dared hope for. This wasn't a hallucination. Not entirely. Something of that ship, something of those men, was here, calling, tethered to this place. Panic took over. I gunned the engine, but the mist thickened instantly, curling around the hull, obscuring everything. The water itself seemed to push back, resisting my flight. The voice escalated into a chorus now, multiple voices overlapping in fractured, wet tones. "Jonathan, help. Don't leave. They're waiting." My vision blurred, reality splintering. The shapes of the wreck and the water, the figures and their faces, all distorted, melted into each other. For a fleeting second, I thought the skiff would lift into the fog itself, vanish completely. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the mist thinned. I was alone. The wreck was gone. The locket, the figures, the voices, they were gone. Just open water and the distant line of cliffs. I returned to the shack, spent and shaking, unwilling to admit what I had witnessed. But the psychological toll had already taken root. I began recording everything. Not just the incidents, but the subtle patterns. When the voice called, how the fog moved, the exact coordinates of impossible signals. The logs became my anchor to reality, though I knew they could not protect me from what was happening in the inside passage. Weeks went by. I avoided the channels, avoided boats, avoided the water. And yet the fog came to me. Not outside, not in my sleep, but in moments of stillness. A draft across my neck, a faint whisper when the heater turned off, like the sensation of being watched from just beyond my vision. I started seeing movement in peripheral vision, catching glimpses of figures just as I blinked, feeling their presence lingering after I turned around. The line between the natural and the supernatural was gone. The passage had become a presence, alive and aware, and it was aware of me. I began to understand something chilling. The ship, the lost crew, the fog, they weren't asking for help in the way the living would understand. They were waiting. And somehow, through some fracture in time and memory, they had found a way to tether to me. I wasn't just an observer. I had become part of their narrative, the last recipient of a signal that should have died decades ago. One night I heard it again, not over the radio this time. It was in the cabin, soft but insistent. Jonathan. I froze, every muscle tight, every rational thought screaming to flee. The air smelled of salt and decay, the unmistakable scent of waterlogged wood and iron. I wanted to run, wanted to convince myself it was the wind, the old pipes, anything. But I couldn't. The voice was patient, endless, waiting for a response. I didn't answer. And yet, I feel it following me still. Not just in the fog, not just in the waves, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeat and breath. I feel the tug of the inside passage, the pull of 50 years of voices calling, and I know that they have not forgotten. That ship has not sunk, not entirely, and I am still the last voice on Channel 9. Days bled into nights without clear distinction. I stopped checking the tide charts. I stopped listening for the weather reports. All of that became irrelevant. The inside passage had made itself present in every detail of my life. The radio, a constant, that insistent reminder of what I could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Channel 9 remained quiet most of the time, but the silence itself was unbearable. It had weight, as if the air itself remembered the ship and the men lost aboard it. One morning, I awoke to find the shack's door open, swinging lightly on its hinges despite the lack of wind. The fog pressed against the windows unnaturally thick, like it had condensed inside while I slept. On the control desk, the radio was tuned to Channel 9, squawking softly as if impatient for my attention. A single word cut through the static, brittle and precise: Jonathan. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to respond, but I couldn't help it. My hands moved before my mind could intervene, flipping switches, adjusting the dials. The coordinates came through clearer this time. Not the usual drifting signal, but a fixed point deep in the passage, where charts marked only rock, ice, and a memory of a storm long gone. I knew I shouldn't go. I knew every experienced mariner in Southeast Alaska would have told me the same thing. It was impossible terrain for a small boat, and the weather was unpredictable even on the clearest day. But the tug was irresistible, a force that bypassed logic and directly accessed some primal, hereditary instinct. It was as if the voices had reached through the decades to find me, and my own curiosity, my own need to answer, became a trap. I prepped the skiff again, more cautiously this time. I took extra fuel, a GPS device, and a small emergency flare kit. But deep down, I knew I was moving into a place that no emergency protocol could save me from. As the engine sputtered to life and I cut the dock lines, the fog rolled around me like a living wall. The water was mirror smooth, yet I could feel the faint resistance beneath the hull. The skiff felt heavier, as if the water itself were thickening, dragging me toward the impossible coordinates. And then I saw the shapes, not the wreck itself, at least not fully, but fragments, pieces of it, glimpsed through the fog. The bow jutted at an unnatural angle, half-submerged, steel corroded and pocked. Figures moved along the deck, slow, deliberate, but never fully solid. I could see arms, torsos, faces blurred by rust and fog. They didn't approach. They just waited, suspended in a moment between existence and decay. The voice came again, fragmented, pleading, almost hypnotic. Jonathan, help! Don't let it sleep. I realized then that the ship wasn't just lost in the water. It was lost in time, or maybe somewhere between time and perception. 50 years of storms, ice, and decay had shaped it into something unrecognizable. The men weren't just dead. They were caught, preserved by the passage, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for someone to answer. I wanted to run. My instincts screamed at me, but I couldn't. My mind had become entangled with the ship, with the voices, with the insistent pulse of Channel 9. Every rational thought that had survived the past weeks told me to turn around, yet my body moved forward, skiff cutting through the fog with an eerie calm. Then the water shifted. A low vibration ran through the hull, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I looked down and saw that the waves weren't natural. They twisted and undulated as if the passage itself were breathing. My radio squawked violently, the static forming patterns that almost resembled words. I couldn't interpret them fully, but the cadence was deliberate, intelligent. Something was aware. Something was guiding me toward the heart of the wreckage. The closer I got, the more distorted reality became. Shapes of the deck stretched and compressed, figures leaning at impossible angles. I could hear faint creaking of metal, groans of timbers under stress, voices overlapping in patterns I couldn't untangle. And yet, through all the chaos, the voice calling my name remained distinct, singular, unwavering. It was patient, expectant, demanding acknowledgement. I tied the skiff to what remained of the bow and climbed carefully. The deck was slick, covered in algae and rust, yet solid enough to hold me. I could see personal effects, corroded and warped, a pocket knife, a fragment of a logbook, a brass compass, all artifacts 50 years old yet strangely preserved. I reached down to touch one of them, a piece of paper, crumbling under my fingers, and the voices screamed in unison, not in anger, but in urgency. "Jonathan, help!" And then I heard a sound that nearly broke me. Laughter. Not cheerful, not warm, but cold, hollow, as if the ship itself were mocking my hesitation. The mist swirled violently, and I realized I was standing at the center of something beyond understanding. I could see the hull's twisted interior beneath me, dark and impossibly deep, almost infinite. The fog inside the wreck moved like smoke, carrying shapes that weren't entirely human. I understood then what the voices wanted. They didn't want to be rescued. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted someone to see what had been hidden, someone to carry the memory forward. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice caught in my throat. My hands shook violently as I tried to record what I could, but the skiff's camera, my phone, even the radio were useless. They failed to capture anything tangible. It was as if the inside passage was censoring reality itself, preserving only what it wanted me to witness. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in a haze of fog, voices, and impossible angles. When I finally stepped back onto the skiff, I realized that the world outside the wreck had changed subtly. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing cliffs I didn't recognize. My bearings were gone. The skiff felt lighter, almost buoyant, as if released from a weight I hadn't understood. I knew with a cold clarity that I had been allowed to leave, not freed, but released. I returned to the shack, exhausted beyond reason. My logs were intact, but useless. The coordinates, the fragments of objects, the recordings, none of them could prove what I had seen. And yet, I knew the truth. The passage hadn't forgotten the ship, it hadn't forgotten the men, and it hadn't forgotten me. Now, years later, I still hear it, not constantly, but occasionally, soft, almost imperceptible, a single syllable across Channel 9, or in the rustle of wind against a window, Jonathan. I have never gone back. I avoid the water, avoid the fog, avoid the channels that carry its memory. Yet sometimes, late at night, I feel the pulse again, like the slow heartbeat of a vessel trapped beneath decades of ice and mist. And I know that the inside passage is waiting, patient, alive, carrying the weight of 50 years of silence and sorrow. I am only its latest witness. I am only the last voice on Channel 9. Even now, years later, the inside passage follows me. Not literally. I don't see the fog crawling across my home or the wreck rising from the water, but in the spaces where reality softens, where perception thins, I feel its weight. I feel the tug of 50 years of voices calling, the pulse of water and steel beneath the surface, and the persistent, impossible sense that someone or something is waiting for me to answer again. I returned to work at the shack reluctantly, never alone, never on Channel 9. My colleagues noticed the change immediately. I no longer laughed at the monotony, no longer indulged in small talk. I carried a quiet tension, a nervous glance toward the mist rising off the water. Occasionally, during long hours of silence, I'd hear a faint, rasping call. I'd tell myself it was the wind, the old pipes, or fatigue, but the sound would linger, almost recognizable in the spaces between the static of other channels. Sleep never returned to me fully. The dreams are constant, though I no longer call them dreams. I walk the decks of that rusted, impossible ship, its planks slick with brine, its figures faded but pleading. Sometimes I see fragments of it in places they should not be. A floating buoy while kayaking near town, a shadow of a figure in the mist creeping over the fjords, the glint of brass among debris washed ashore after a storm. The memories, or what I remember as memories, intrude on the everyday. Simple tasks like walking the docks or checking antennas feel weighted as if unseen eyes track my movements. I have tried to tell someone. I have tried to explain the coordinates, the voices, the impossible wreck, but no one can hear it. My recordings, my logs, my photographs, either corrupted, unreadable, or missing the key elements that made the experience undeniable. Those who work the waters dismiss it as hallucination, paranoia, or exaggeration. I can't fault them. Who would believe that a ship lost 50 years ago could still call out across time? That a fog could become a sentient, deliberate presence? That voices, fractured and layered, could reach through decades to find a single person? Sometimes when the radio hums in the quiet hours, I can hear it again. Just a syllable, barely audible, Jonathan. It is patient. It does not demand. It waits. And I know that I am still tethered, still marked. The ship and its crew have not vanished. They have only moved into another layer of existence, where time folds back on itself, where the inside passage preserves them in suspended agony. And I am the last recipient of their call, the only one who knows they are there. I avoid the water now, avoid the fjords entirely. I travel inland whenever possible. Yet even in towns, the fog sometimes drifts in off the bay. I see shapes in its folds, shadows where none should be. At night, I hear the faint creak of rusted metal and the whisper of wet fabric, sounds impossible outside the wreck. My own reflection sometimes seems warped, as if the passage has marked me, intertwined me with its memory. I am haunted by guilt, not only for those I never saved, but for answering the call at all. For acknowledging the impossible, for stepping into a place where no living person should tread. Every day, I carry the knowledge that the inside passage is patient and eternal, that the wreck and its crew still linger beneath the fog, still aware, still waiting, and that if I ever return, the line between the living and the lost will blur completely. Years later, a colleague sent me a photograph from a survey flight. A small patch of fog lingered in a fjord. Nothing remarkable at first glance, but in the corner of the image, half submerged in mist and water, I saw it, the bow of a rusted ship perfectly intact, and a figure leaning against the railing looking directly at the camera, though its face was obscured by corrosion and shadow. My breath caught. I recognized the posture, the tilt of the head. It was waiting. For me. I put the photograph in a drawer where I cannot ignore it but cannot destroy it. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faintest hum on a distant channel. Channel 9, I do not respond. I cannot. But the recognition is there, subtle and insistent, and I know that one day it may call again. And when it does, I will be there, whether I want to be or not. The inside passage has claimed its legacy, and I am part of it. I am changed. I am vigilant. I am haunted. I am the last voice on Channel 9, and the fog waits. The first thing I noticed wasn't the quiet. It was the way the tree lines seemed closer every time I looked up. I'd been camping long enough to know when shadows play tricks, when a forest feels alive because your own pulse won't settle. But this wasn't that. This was something else. And in the years since, I've replayed those nights again and again, wondering if there had been some unspoken rule I broke the moment I parked my RV at that campground. I was 36 at the time, still chasing the American idea of freedom, the kind that only a set of wheels, an open road, and a willingness to leave everything familiar behind can give you. My Volkswagen wasn't new. The paint was faded, the cabinets rattled when the wind pushed through, and I knew every sound it made because when you travel alone, those sounds matter. They are your inventory of safety, your markers of what is normal. When a hinge creaks differently or a door clicks shut louder than it should, you notice. You have to. That week, I'd set out for the Northern Rockies. The RV park wasn't much more than a strip of gravel cut into the base of the slope, hemmed in by tall pines that rose like silent guards. There were 10 spaces total. When I pulled in, only 3 were occupied. An elderly couple with a Class A motorhome, a father and son tent camping beside a small trailer, and a beat-up pickup with a camper shell parked near the far edge. The rest of the spaces stretched empty, each one edged by the same thin line of forest. The camp host had told me the name of the place was Spruce Hollow, but names don't stick when you're distracted by what you feel instead of what you hear. Something about the way the air tasted there, like pine sap and cold iron, made me want to leave even as I cut the engine. But I reminded myself of why I camped, to face the discomfort, to sit with it, and to come out the other side stronger. That's the lesson RV life gives you if you let it. The first night passed with only small reminders of what was to come. I heard what I thought was a woodpecker, except the sound carried on long past dusk, echoing in intervals too regular to belong to any bird. The boy at the next campsite woke coughing, and I could hear his father's tired voice calming him, the kind of murmur only someone who's carried a child through sickness can speak with. I told myself everything was normal, that fear only feeds itself if you don't tether it. But the second night, I realized the trees weren't where they had been. It sounds absurd to say it out loud, and maybe you dismiss it the way I tried to at first, a trick of the eye, perspective shifting with the sun. But I had parked with intention, measuring where my headlights hit the first row of trunks. I had chosen my space for the distance, for the buffer of light I could cast between myself and the woods. And yet, as I stepped outside to stretch after dinner, I realized the line of trees had closed the gap. Not by much, just enough that I felt their presence leaning in. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at bark that glistened damp in the moonlight, and that's when I felt the first ripple of suspicion. Not that someone was watching me, not that something waited in the dark. No, the suspicion was turned inward, a question rising in my own chest. What if my senses couldn't be trusted anymore? That's a different kind of fear, when you doubt yourself instead of the world around you. That night, I locked the doors earlier than usual. I set my phone flashlight on the counter, I checked the latches twice, and when the knocking started, low, deliberate taps against the side of the van, I lay frozen, telling myself it was branches shifting in the wind. Except there was no wind. The air outside was still, the kind of silence that presses against your skin like a hand. By morning, the boy and his father were gone. Their space sat empty, the fire pit cold, no trace of tire tracks leading away. I didn't remember hearing their car start, didn't remember hearing the shuffle of a tent being taken down. I asked the camp host about it, but she only shrugged, her mouth twitching as if she'd already answered this question too many times before. "People come and go," she said, and turned back to her clipboard. The day passed heavy, the sun filtered by clouds that thickened as if the sky itself didn't want me to see too far. I walked the gravel road leading out of camp, but every step felt like it carried me deeper in instead. When I turned back, the pines seemed taller, closer, their shadows angling across the ground toward me like spokes of a wheel pulling inward. And when night fell again, the tree line moved closer still. I measured this time, not with instruments, but with instinct. I knew how far my headlights reached when I flicked them on, how they'd carved out a hollow of light when I first arrived. That hollow was shrinking. The trunks now stood within the edge of my beams, needles catching silver glints like eyes turned toward me. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. That's the promise we all make when fear tells us it's time to go, just one more night. But the truth is, by then, I wasn't sure leaving was an option, because every time I looked at that tree line, it wasn't just closer, it was waiting. And if I'm honest with you, it wasn't the trees themselves that scared me most. It was the sense that something inside them wanted me to step forward first, like they were patient, pulling in inch by inch, knowing I would eventually meet them halfway. That night I slept with the curtains drawn tight, but even then, I swore I could hear branches scraping not against the outside of the RV, but along the inside of my mind, as if the forest wasn't moving closer to me at all, as if I was the one being drawn in, every thought bending toward the dark. I woke before dawn, the kind of waking that isn't from rest but from alarm, the body yanking itself into awareness before the mind understands why. The interior of the van was cold, my breath visible in thin ribbons. The clock read 4:13 a.m., but the silence outside told me time wasn't the thing I should be measuring. I opened the curtain above the sink, and my chest locked tight. The trees stood so close now that I could see the texture of their bark without stepping outside. Lines and fissures in the wood looked like faces, some screaming, some grinning, some hollow-eyed. My headlights, switched off the night before, reflected faintly on the slickness of the trunks, as if dew or sap had bled down their sides. I wanted to leave right then. Slam the ignition, kick gravel, never look back. But leaving in the dark felt worse than staying. It felt like driving into a mouth that would only close once I was inside. So I waited. I sat at the little dinette table, staring at the clock as minutes dragged themselves into hours, convincing myself the sun would break the spell. When daylight finally came, the trees looked farther away again. That gave me a moment of relief, but it was hollow, because deep down I understood the truth. They moved only when the dark allowed them. Daylight was no victory, just a pause. I packed quickly. The older couple with the Class A were already gone, their space stripped bare. That left only the pickup with the camper shell at the far end, and me. I walked down the gravel to see if anyone was around. The truck was still there, but no one stirred. Its windows were fogged from the inside. I hesitated, then knocked once on the door. The echo of my knuckles against the metal shell seemed to ripple down the entire line of forest. No one answered. Back in my van, I started the engine. Relief surged through me as the rumble filled the cabin, proof of control, proof that I still had the power to move. I pulled out of the sight, gravel crunching under my tires, and aimed for the exit road. But that's when the real panic began. The road didn't take me out. It should have been a simple loop, down the strip, past the camp host's cabin, then onto the highway. I'd traced it with my eyes when I arrived, knew the landmarks, but as I drove, the gravel narrowed, the trees pressed close on either side, and instead of opening onto asphalt, the road bent back into camp. I circled twice, 3 times, each attempt landing me right back where I had started. The same empty spaces, the same fogged truck, the same camp host's cabin standing shut, curtains drawn like it had been abandoned years ago. That's when I stopped telling myself it was nerves. That's when suspicion hardened into dread. The tree line wasn't just following me, it was trapping me. I killed the engine and sat there, palms pressed to the wheel, sweat dripping even though the air was cold. My mind clawed for explanations. A missed turn, a private road, some backcountry trick of the landscape. But I knew better. I had grown up in these mountains. I knew the way roads bent and folded, how terrain could mislead the eye. This was different. This was deliberate. I forced myself to get out, the gravel hard under my boots. The forest loomed taller than it had at dawn, and the silence was so dense I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I walked to the host's cabin, each step tight with the awareness that the tree line shifted when I didn't look directly at it. You could sense it in your peripheral vision, the subtle lean, the way shadows slid a little farther across the ground when you blinked. At the door I knocked. The sound was dull, absorbed instantly by the wood, as though the cabin had no hollow inside. No answer, no movement, just the weight of the trees inching nearer with every breath. That's when the smell hit me. Not pine, not damp soil, not the familiar musk of a forest. This was different. Sweet, like fruit left to rot in the heat. Underneath it, a metallic tang like rust or blood. It clung to my skin, filled my nose, coated my throat until I gagged. I stumbled back to the van and slammed the door. I thought about driving again, about forcing the wheel, flooring the gas, pushing through no matter what the road did. But something inside me whispered that acceleration would only carry me deeper. That's how the forest wanted me, desperate enough to throw myself forward. So I stayed. That night, the knocking returned, louder. Not random anymore, but in patterns. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 quick raps, like code. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound carried inside me, vibrating in bone rather than air. And somewhere between the knocks, I thought I heard words. Not spoken, not clear, but shaped in rhythm like speech. My name, maybe. Or maybe the name of whoever had been here before me. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking in the dark, the curtains torn open though I hadn't touched them, and the trees. God, the trees. Right against the van, their trunks pressed like bodies against glass. The bark shimmered in the faint light, wet with something thicker than sap, and the smell of rot was inside my lungs. I wanted to scream, but fear pinned the sound in my throat. I couldn't even breathe right. The air was dense, almost liquid, as if I had been submerged. My skin prickled, damp with more than sweat. That was when I realized the condensation on the inside of the windows wasn't mine. I don't know how long I sat frozen like that, my body refusing to move, my mind slipping between prayer and resignation. At some point, the pressure eased, the air thinned, and when the first pale thread of dawn touched the horizon, the trees had drawn back again. Not far. Just enough to suggest that daylight was still some kind of boundary. That morning, the pickup truck was gone. No tire marks, no sound of departure, just gone. I was alone. And for the first time, the thought entered me whole and undeniable. Maybe no one leaves this place by the road. Maybe the only way out is through the tree line. The idea sat in my mind like a splinter, that the only way out was through. I didn't want it, didn't believe it, but the thought pulsed there every time I looked at the narrowing strip of gravel. The road had betrayed me. The daylight was only buying me hours. The forest was patient, and patience always wins. I spent that day circling the campground on foot, trying to convince myself there had to be another way. I followed the edge of the tree line, keeping the van in sight so I wouldn't lose my bearings. But the farther I walked, the more the land bent back into itself. Every path curved into the same perspective. Rows of trees leaning toward me, shadows deepening, my footprints swallowed by damp soil that seemed to erase them some seconds after I'd stepped. By noon, I stopped walking. My legs shook. My head rang with the heat of confusion. When you can't trust the ground beneath you, fear isn't just in your chest, it's in your bones. It whispers that you're already gone, that no matter what steps you take, you're only circling something that's already claimed you. Back at the van, I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the wheel, and that's when the memories came. Not mine, not really. They didn't feel like imagination either, more like echoes left behind. Images pressed into the bark, waiting to bleed into whoever stayed long enough. I saw flashes of others. A woman in her 40s clutching a map, turning it over and over as if the lines had betrayed her. A man in camouflage stepping into the tree line with a rifle slung over his shoulder, his jaw tight, his eyes already hollow. A family. 2 parents, 2 kids, huddled in a camper, their mouths open in silent screams as something scraped along the siding. None of them spoke, but I felt the same thing in all of them. Resignation. That quiet, final understanding that the forest always gets closer. I shook my head, slammed my fists against the wheel, tried to push it out. But it lingered like sap clinging to skin. That night, I didn't bother closing the curtains. Some part of me understood the forest didn't need barriers anymore. The knocking didn't come. Instead, there was breathing. Not mine, it came from outside, deep and rhythmic, as if the trees themselves had lungs. Each inhale drew the air colder. Each exhale thickened the smell of rot until it stung my eyes. I pressed my forehead to the glass just once, and what I saw still knots my stomach to this day. Between two trunks stood a figure, pale as the bark, with limbs too long, fingers touching the ground. Its head was tilted, not in threat, but in study, besought like I was a specimen it had grown curious about. The breath I heard was its pulling the forest in and out with every rise of its chest. I fell back against the table, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I wanted to convince myself I'd imagined it, that fear had painted a body where there was none. But when I looked again, the trunks were closer, as if they had shifted in the time it took me to blink. That was the night I stopped thinking of escape as survival. Escape became a question of will. Could I face the thing inside those trees? Could I step into the dark instead of letting it step into me? The answer came sooner than I expected. Sometime in the dead hours, when the world outside had lost even the faint memory of light, the van rocked. Not a gust of wind, not the subtle sway of settling ground. This was deliberate. A shove, like giant hands pressing against the metal, testing its strength. I gripped the counter, teeth clenched, as the cabinets rattled and something heavy slid across the floor. Another shove, harder. The windows bowed inward, groaning. I screamed at the top of my lungs, a raw sound that broke the stillness like glass, and for a moment the rocking stopped. Silence. Then, as if in reply, the entire tree line exhaled, every trunk releasing a hiss that roared together into a single, low moan. That was it. I knew if I stayed another night, I wouldn't leave at all. So when dawn broke, pale and thin, I made my decision. I packed a bag, just enough to carry water, a flashlight, a knife I barely knew how to use. I told myself I'd mark the trees as I went, keep a trail back. But in the back of my mind, I knew. No one comes back from the forest's invitation. I stepped out, the ground slick underfoot, and crossed the invisible boundary where gravel ended and roots began. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not absence of sound, but silence alive, pressing, expectant. Every twig I snapped echoed louder than it should. Every breath seemed stolen. The second thing I noticed was that the trees weren't fixed. They swayed, leaned, curved. Not with the wind, but with my steps, adjusting themselves like walls in a shifting maze. I marked them anyway, dragging the knife along the bark. But each time I turned back, the marks were gone, replaced by new textures, new scars. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, hours, maybe days. Time folded in on itself, every shadow stretching too long, every path leading deeper. I caught glimpses of that pale figure moving parallel to me. Never closer, never farther, just there, pacing me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Once I stumbled into a clearing. At the center was a fire pit, long cold, stones blackened and cracked. Around it sat 3 chairs, 2 plastic, 1 wood. They faced inward, waiting, and on the ground beside them, half buried in soil, was a shoe. A child's shoe, small and faded, its laces stiff with rot. I dropped it. My stomach turned so violently I thought I'd collapse, but I forced myself to move on. The forest wanted me to linger. I couldn't give it that. As the light dimmed again, if it was evening, if there was such a thing anymore, I felt the tree line closing around me tighter, trunks overlapping, branches knitting into a roof that strangled what little sky remained. The air grew so thick I could barely lift my arms. The figure appeared again, closer this time, its face still obscured but its posture unmistakable, waiting. And that's when I realized the truth I hadn't let myself think. The tree line wasn't following me. I was becoming part of it. Every step deeper, every breath I drew, the forest took something from me. Memory, strength, self. That's what happened to the family, the woman, the hunter. They didn't disappear. They became echoes in the bark, shadows in the trunks, breathing in rhythm with the thing that watched me now. I staggered, dropping to my knees, and for the first time I thought of surrender, of letting it take me. It would be easier than fighting, easier than resisting the pull that had been growing since the moment I arrived. But something in me, some stubborn, ragged part that refused to be erased, rose up. I don't know if it was anger or desperation, but I screamed again, louder than before, my voice tearing through the trees. Not in fear this time, but in defiance. A sound to remind myself I was still separate, still alive, still mine. The forest froze. The figure tilted its head once more, studying me. And then, in the stillness, it whispered back. Not in a language I knew, not in words I could repeat, but I understood the meaning. It wasn't done with me yet. The whisper lingered in my ears long after it faded, like a seed planted deep inside me, waiting to take root. I stumbled backward, my boots catching in the roots, my palms slick against bark that pulsed faintly under my touch, as if the trees had a heartbeat of their own. I wanted to run, but the forest didn't allow running. Every path twisted, every turn folded back, every gap closed as quickly as it appeared. I thought about turning back to the van, but the thought itself felt dangerous. The road wasn't a road anymore. It was an anchor the forest had already cut loose. There was no van, no gravel, no escape waiting there. There was only forward, and forward was into whatever the forest wanted me to become. By the time I reached another clearing, the light had drained from the sky, leaving only the faint glow of something unnatural, pale, greenish, the color of deep water. The clearing wasn't empty this time. In the center stood a tree wider than a house, its trunk split open like a mouth, sap dripping thick as honey down its sides. The smell was overwhelming, sweet rot, metallic, suffocating. And embedded in the sap were things, watches, keys, a dented license plate, a pair of cracked glasses, a photograph half submerged, its image distorted but still visible, a man and a woman smiling in front of an RV, the date scribbled in the corner. 1997. Their faces were blurred by the resin, but their smiles had the same hollowness I'd seen in the memories pressed into my head. I couldn't breathe. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The sap pulsed as if something inside the tree was alive, and then I saw it, a reflection of myself staring back from the glossy surface. But it wasn't me. Not exactly. The face was older, thinner, eyes sunken, skin stretched too tight across bone. My own reflection, if I stayed. I staggered back, choking on the stench. That's when the whisper returned, stronger, curling inside my skull. Stay, stay, stay. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation, spoken with the patience of something that knew time meant nothing here. I tore myself away and plunged back into the forest. The trees seemed to close ranks behind me, trunks sliding together, sealing the clearing off like it had never existed. My lungs burned, my throat raw, my vision swimming. Every breath felt stolen. Every sound I made was swallowed whole. And yet, somewhere ahead, I heard movement. Different from the breathing, different from the figure that shadowed me. Footsteps. Human, uneven, heavy with exhaustion. Hello? The word tore from me before I could stop it. The footsteps paused. For a moment, silence pressed down again, thicker than before. Then slowly, a voice answered. Who's there? It was rough, cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. But it was human. I ran toward it, branches clawing at my arms, roots catching my ankles. My flashlight beam cut across trunks that seemed to bend away just enough to let me through. And then I saw him, a man crouched at the base of a tree, his clothes in tatters, his beard long and tangled. His eyes darted toward me, wide with disbelief. You're real? He asked, his voice trembling. I froze, because I recognized him. Not his name, not his story, but his face. It was the man from the photograph in the sap. He laughed when he saw me staring, a dry, broken sound. Yeah, I know. Thought I was gone, too. He clawed at his own arms, skin mottled with scars, patches where bark seemed to be growing through. It doesn't let you go, not really. My throat closed. How long have you been here? He shook his head, eyes darting upward as if the forest might punish him for answering. Doesn't matter. Years, decades maybe. It makes time soft, pliable. You stop counting. That's the trick. Once you stop fighting, it starts carving pieces of you out. You don't even notice until you're hollow. He leaned closer, gripping my sleeve. His fingers were rough, nails blackened. Don't listen to it. Don't believe the voice. It tells you what you want to hear until you can't tell what's yours anymore. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, his expression shifted. His eyes widened with terror, his grip tightening on my arm. It's here, he whispered. It's listening. The forest groaned, a low creak that echoed through the trunks, and the man shoved me back. Run! I stumbled, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. By the time I caught myself, he was gone. Not ran away. Gone. The space where he'd crouched was empty, the ground bare, the smell of sap thick in the air. I didn't run. I couldn't. My body shook too violently to move, my thoughts scattering like leaves. All I could do was clutch the knife tighter, even though I knew it was useless. The figure emerged again, stepping between the trunks. Its face was clearer now, and I wished it hadn't been, because it wasn't one face. It was many, layered, shifting. Every person who had ever stepped into these woods, their features woven into a single, pale mask. And at the edges of its form, the bark of the trees seemed to ripple, as if it wasn't separate from the forest at all. I backed away, my breath shallow. The voice returned, not a whisper this time, but a chorus, overlapping, endless. Stay. 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 Something in me snapped. Fear had carried me this far, but fear couldn't carry me out. I gritted my teeth, raised the knife, and screamed back into the dark, no. The forest stilled. For the first time, the voices paused. The figure tilted its head again, studying me not with curiosity this time, but with recognition, like it had been waiting for that word all along. And then, slowly, it stepped aside. A path opened between the trunks, narrow but clear, stretching into a darkness I couldn't measure. My heart hammered, every instinct screaming it was a trap. But I also knew this was the only chance I would ever get. I tightened my grip on the knife, lifted the flashlight, and stepped forward. The path closed behind me instantly, the sound of branches knitting shut, echoing like a cage snapping locked. I was in deeper now, deeper than anyone should ever go. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I understood. The tree line wasn't chasing me anymore. I was chasing it. The path was narrow, no more than 2 feet across, hemmed in by trunks so close their bark scraped my shoulders as I moved. The air was colder here, sharp in my lungs, carrying a faint hiss like something breathing just out of sight. My flashlight's beam caught only a short stretch ahead, swallowed too quickly by dark, as though the path itself bent light away. I told myself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, but my mind kept circling the same truth. The forest wanted me to walk this path. It had cleared it for me, and if the forest wanted something, what chance did I have of denying it? Still, I walked. The ground softened under my boots, moss slick and spongy, roots twisting like veins. My ears rang with sounds I couldn't place. Low hums, faint whispers, the occasional crack like bones snapping underfoot, though I hadn't stepped on anything solid. My grip on the knife slipped as my palms grew slick with sweat. Then the path widened into another clearing, but this one was different. At its center stood an RV, not mine, not anyone's I'd seen at camp. The paint was peeled, the windows opaque with grime, but the shape was unmistakable. A late 70s Winnebago, slouched under the weight of years. Its door hung open, a strip of darkness yawning inside. I froze at the edge of the clearing, bile rising in my throat, because I'd seen this RV before. Not here, not in person, but in a photograph years ago, tacked to a bulletin board at a ranger station in Montana. The flyer had read, "Missing Family, last seen June 1985. A couple and their 2 kids. The same family I'd glimpsed in that vision the forest had pressed into me. The air grew heavier as I stepped closer. My flashlight beam caught movement inside, a flicker like a figure ducking out of sight. My breath quickened. I wanted to call out, but every instinct screamed not to. My voice would only feed whatever listened. I climbed the steps, the metal soft with rust, and pushed the door wider. The smell hit me first. Mildew, rot, something older beneath it. Inside, the RV was intact. Cabinets shut, cushions sunken but unbroken, a table still bolted in place. And on that table, 4 plates, each with food still resting on them. Meat dried black, bread crumbled to dust, glasses cracked but half filled with water. Time hadn't passed in here. It had stopped. I reached for one of the glasses, my hand shaking, but stopped inches away. Because the water rippled, not from my movement, from something beneath it. A faint vibration like a pulse. That's when I heard the laughter. It came from the back of the RV, soft at first, the kind of laugh a child makes when hiding in a game. But it stretched, rising higher, twisting into something that wasn't play anymore. I backed toward the door, knife trembling in my hand, every muscle screaming to run. And then, just before I slipped outside, a voice, clear, sharp, human, cut through the air. "Why didn't you leave?" I spun, flashlights sweeping across the interior, but there was no one there. Only the plates, the rippling water, the empty shadows. I fled into the clearing, lungs burning, the sound of the door slamming behind me, echoing like a gunshot. The forest pressed closer now, trunks leaning in, branches arching overhead until only a thin sliver of sky remained. The figure appeared again, standing across the clearing. This time it wasn't pale, it wasn't distant. It wore the shape of the man I'd just heard. The father from the photograph, his shirt stained, his hands hanging limp, but his eyes, God, his eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like hollows carved straight through his skull. "You should have left," he said. His voice was steady, almost kind, but it carried weight, like the forest spoke through him. "It's too late now." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "No, I won't stay here. I'm not." The ground shifted beneath me, moss sinking like quicksand, roots curled around my ankles, tightening with each word. I thrashed, stabbing the knife downward, hacking at the vines, but every cut bled sap that hissed like steam. The forest moaned in response, the sound of countless voices overlapping, a choir of resignation. I tore free, gasping boots coated in sticky resin. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died. The clearing plunged into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of eyes, dozens of them, opening in the tree trunks around me. Some wide and round, others narrow, some weeping sap like tears. All of them staring. Panic surged. I ran blind, branches slashing my face, roots clawing my legs. The voices rose with every step, not whispers anymore, but screams, shouts, cries in languages I couldn't understand. They weren't trying to scare me. They were pulling me in, every sound tugging at my chest, dragging me closer to surrender. When I finally collapsed, knees slamming into damp earth, the figure was waiting. Not across the clearing this time, but inches from me. Its face was no longer shifting. It was mine. My own features staring back, but hollowed, drained, eyes black pits, mouth twisted into something that wanted to smile but didn't remember how. I dropped the knife. My body shook so violently I couldn't hold it anymore. My other self crouched, tilting its head, studying me the way it always had. "Stay," it said, my voice, my tone, my breath. And for the first time I felt myself wanting to. Not because I believed I belonged here, not because I wanted to give in, but because the thought of fighting any longer seemed impossible. The forest wasn't trying to kill me, it was trying to erase me, to fold me into itself until there was nothing left but bark and echoes. And wasn't that easier than clawing at hope that had nowhere left to go? My eyelids sagged, my chest slowed. The ground felt soft beneath me, pulling me down into rest. But then, one image broke through. My Volkswagen. Faded paint, rattling cabinets, the smell of old upholstery and gasoline. My home, my freedom. The reason I had chosen this life in the first place. I remembered every night I'd parked under an open sky, every sunrise I'd chased, every road I hadn't yet driven, and I knew I couldn't give it up. Not like this. Not here. I forced my eyes open, clawed at the dirt, and screamed, not in defiance this time, but in desperation. A sound ripped from the last living piece of me that refused to vanish. The forest shook. The figure faltered, its edges blurring. The voices rose to a roar, then collapsed into silence. And in that silence, a new path appeared. Not wide, not safe, just enough. I dragged myself to my feet, every muscle screaming, and stumbled toward it. Because as much as the forest wanted me to stay, I wasn't ready to stop moving. The new path was narrower than the last, almost too narrow to walk. The trunks pressed so close that bark scraped my arms raw, and branches tangled in my hair until it felt like the forest itself was dragging me backward. Every step forward was a fight. Every breath burned with the sour tang of sap. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed, a low vibration in the air, like the hum of something alive buried deep beneath the roots. I staggered, dizzy, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, my figure, would be waiting again. I didn't need to look behind me to know it was there. I could feel it, a weight at my back, breathing when I breathed, moving when I moved, a mirror without glass. The path tilted downward, the ground turning slick, soil giving way to rock. The smell of rot thinned, replaced by damp earth and the faint metallic bite of water. Somewhere ahead, I heard a trickle, a stream cutting through the silence. I pushed harder, stumbling into a ravine where a narrow creek wound its way between moss-slick stones. For the first time since stepping into the tree line, I felt something close to hope. Running water, real, untouched by the forest's stillness. My chest loosened, my pulse quickened. If I followed it, maybe it would lead me out. Water always leads somewhere. I knelt and splashed it across my face, the cold biting into my skin, jolting me awake. But when I cupped my hands to drink, the water shimmered. Not with light, with reflection. My reflection. And it wasn't my face I saw, it was the hollowed one, the other me, staring up from the surface. Its lips moved. Soundless. I dropped the water, stumbling back, but the creek's surface rippled outwards past, spreading the reflection into dozens of faces. Men, women, children, all of them staring, all of them me and not me, all of them whispering without sound. My legs buckled. I wanted to run, but the forest had other plans. The trees leaned, arching over the ravine, branches knitting together until the water darkened under their shadow. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through my bones until I thought my chest would split open. And then I saw them. Bodies, half submerged in the creek, their forms tangled in roots and moss. Some fresh, eyes open and glassy, others little more than bone, bark growing through their rib cages. They weren't floating, they were planted, the forest feeding on them, turning them into something new. One of them twitched. Its head jerked, water spilling from its mouth as it tried to speak. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was the forest, the same endless chorus I'd heard before. But this time, I understood the words. You are already here. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, I'm not. But my denial sounded weak, hollow, even to me, because I could feel it deep in my skin, the slow spread of something not mine. My fingertips tingled. My veins felt thick, sluggish. When I pressed my hand against the nearest tree, I swore I felt a matching pulse. The other me stepped out from behind the trunks then, closing the gap between us. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. Its face was calm, its eyes steady, as if it already knew how this would end. You can't outrun it, it said, in my voice. You've never been outrunning. You've only been delaying. The words sank deep, because part of me knew they were true. The forest hadn't followed me. I'd been carrying it since the first night. Every knock, every whisper, every inch it moved closer had been carving into me, marking me. The tree line wasn't chasing me, it was inside me. I staggered back against a rock, knife raised though my grip was weak. My double crouched low, tilting its head, smiling now in a way that was almost kind. You could stop fighting, it whispered. Rest. Become. You've seen what happens to the others. They're not lost. They're part of something bigger. Stronger, eternal. The creek hissed, the bodies shifted, the faces in the water turned, mouths opening wide in silent invitation. I wanted to collapse, to let it end here. The weight of fear, exhaustion, and despair pressed harder than the trees ever could. But then I remembered something. The boy from that second night. His coughing, his father's voice soothing him in the dark. They had left, disappeared without a sound, yes, but maybe not gone. Maybe someone had made it out. And if one person could, maybe I could too. I forced air into my lungs, forced my legs to steady, forced my voice to rise. I'm not yours. The other me blinked, its expression unreadable. I don't care what you show me, I said, my voice shaking but louder now. I don't care what you whisper. I'm not staying. I won't be hollow. I won't be bark. I'm leaving. The figure's smile widened, but its eyes flickered. Just for a moment. A crack. Doubt or anger or maybe both. The trees groaned, the air shivered, and the path behind me opened again. Narrow, jagged, leading upward. My double tilted its head, then stepped backward by fading into the trunks like it had never existed. I didn't hesitate. I ran. The ground clawed at me, branches slashed my arms, the hum in the air rose to a scream. Faces opened in the bark, mouths stretched wide, their cries blending into a single howl of rage and sorrow. But the path held. My legs burned, lungs screamed, but I didn't stop. At last, the trees thinned, the ground hardened, gravel crunched under my boots. I staggered forward, and there it was, my van, my Volkswagen, sitting in the same spot I'd left it, headlights dull, paint faded but real, solid, waiting. I collapsed against the side, sobbing, my hands gripping the cold metal like it was a lifeline. The forest loomed behind me, its line of trees perfectly still, perfectly ordinary, as though it had never moved at all. But I knew better. Because as I climbed inside, locked the doors, and started the engine, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. And for a split second, the face staring back wasn't mine. I slammed the mirror upward, refusing to look again. The van's engine roared to life under my trembling hands, a sound that should have comforted me, but instead rattled through my bones like a warning. Gravel sprayed as I pulled away from the sight, headlights cutting through the thin dawn. The road was there this time, straight, solid, unbroken. My pulse quickened with relief, but I didn't trust it. Not yet. Every few seconds I glanced out the window, expecting the trees to close in, the trunks to lean across the road and force me back, but they stayed where they were, tall and indifferent, as though the nightmare had ended the moment I chose to leave. It felt wrong. Too easy. After 10 minutes, I passed the faded wooden sign, Spruce Hollow Campground. Its letters were chipped, its post swallowed halfway by moss. Beyond it, the highway stretched wide and empty, morning sun spilling across asphalt. My chest loosened, tears burning my eyes. I had made it out, but freedom didn't feel like freedom. I drove for miles, the van rattling, the tires humming a steady rhythm that should have calmed me. Yet every sound carried an echo. Every bump in the road felt like something pressing from beneath. And in the rearview mirror, though I refused to stare too long, I swore I saw shadows shifting in the back of the van. At one point, I pulled over at a rest stop, just a cracked slab of asphalt beside the highway, a single picnic table under a faded awning. My hands ached from gripping the wheel too tightly, my throat raw from screaming the I didn't remember making. I stepped out, stretching stiff muscles, letting the sun wash over me. That's when I noticed it, the tree line. It stood at the edge of the rest stop, farther than it had been at Spruce Hollow, but close enough to see. Tall pines, swaying faintly though the air was still. I stared at them, heart hammering, and felt the same pressure I'd felt in the campground, the sense of being watched, of being measured. I turned back to the van, ready to drive again, but froze when I saw the passenger seat. It wasn't empty. For just a blink, no more than a heartbeat, I saw someone sitting there. Not the pale figure, not my hollow reflection, but the boy who had coughed in the night, whose father had soothed him, whose space had been empty by morning. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his lips moving without sound. And then he was gone. I stumbled backward, nearly falling against the picnic table. My breath came ragged, my vision swimming. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind breaking under fear and lack of sleep. But the imprint of him remained on the seat, like dust disturbed where he had been. I climbed back in, slammed the door, and drove. Hours blurred. Gas stations came and went. Towns flickered by. I kept moving, convinced that I just put enough miles between me and Spruce Hollow, the weight would lift. But no matter how far I drove, the forest stayed with me. In every reflection, shop windows, puddles, the chrome of passing trucks, I caught glimpses of trees leaning closer, shadows bending wrong. By dusk, I was exhausted. My hands shook, my head throbbed, my body begged for rest. I pulled into another campground, this one larger, paved, filled with families and retirees and shiny motorhomes. Laughter drifted across the lot, the smell of barbecue in the air. Normalcy. Safety. But I didn't feel safe. I parked at the far edge, killed the engine, and sat there, staring at the line of trees beyond the lights. The families around me felt distant, unreal, as if they were part of some fragile stage set that could be torn down in an instant. When night fell, I drew the curtains tight and lay on the narrow bed, knife in hand. For a while, nothing happened. No knocking, no breathing, just the muffled sounds of televisions and quiet conversations outside. But around midnight, the campground fell silent. Too silent. I opened my eyes, heart pounding, and realized I couldn't hear a single voice, not even the crackle of fires. Slowly, I pulled the curtain back. Every RV, every trailer, every tent, the lights were out. The spaces stood empty, no movement, no sound. And at the edge of the lot, the tree line stood closer than it had before. I whispered to myself, over and over, "You left. You escaped. You're out." But the words rang hollow, because deep down I knew the truth. I hadn't left the forest. The forest had left with me. I pressed my hands over my face, rocking in the silence, fighting the pull of despair. That's when I heard it again. The voice. Not outside this time. Inside. Stay. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but the sound caught in my throat, because the voice wasn't a stranger's anymore. It wasn't the figure's. It was mine. My own voice, whispering inside my head, soft and patient, echoing every word I had sworn I'd never believe. Stay. The knife slipped from my hand, and in the reflection of the darkened window, I saw myself staring back. Not the man I was. The other one. The hollowed one. Waiting. Smiling. I tore myself from the window, slamming the curtain shut, heart battering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. My reflection still burned in my mind, its smile stretching wider than mine ever could. I stumbled backward, tripping over the knife, landing hard on the floor. The van rocked, just once, subtle, almost like someone had leaned against it. I froze, palms pressed to the carpet, ears straining. Silence. Then another push, harder this time, rocking me side to side. I grabbed the knife, holding it tight, and whispered to myself, "It's not real, it's not real." But the van shuddered again and again until the cabinets rattled, the glass in the windows quivered, and I knew it was real enough. I wanted to fling the door open, to run screaming into the night. But what would I find out there? More trees? More silence? More of me? I sat there shaking until suddenly the rocking stopped. I thought maybe it was over, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Circling the van, gravel crunching under weight that was heavier than human. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. I pressed my back against the door, knife in hand, tracking the sound as it moved around me. Then came the knock. Not random, not playful. 3 hard raps against the metal, a pause, 2 more. The same rhythm I'd heard back in Spruce Hollow. It was here. I clenched my jaw, refusing to respond, but then the voice came, muffled through the door. Let me in. It was my voice, exactly my voice. The knife shook in my grip, sweat dripping down my wrist. I whispered, "No." The voice chuckled, soft and cold. "You already did." I wanted to scream, to deny it, but part of me knew it was right. From the first night when the tree line moved closer, I had let it in. Every doubt, every hesitation, every whisper I'd listened to, that's all it needed. The footsteps moved again, circling, slower this time. Then silence. I held my breath, waiting, until finally, exhaustion dragged me into a restless half-sleep. I dreamed of trees, endless rows, each one with my face carved into the bark, mouths opening and closing in whispers I couldn't escape. When I woke, the campground was empty. Every RV, every tent, every car was gone, just like the boy and his father, just like the old couple, just like the pickup. My van sat alone in a sea of abandoned spaces. The fire pits were cold, the picnic tables bare, the ground untouched by tire tracks. And at the far edge, the tree line had crept closer again. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just drove. Mile after mile, town after town, the forest stayed with me, always at the edges, always in the rear view, always pressing closer no matter how far I went. I stopped only when my eyes blurred too badly to see. Every rest stop, every gas station, every small town parking lot, it was there, waiting. At night, I stopped pretending I could rest. The knocks came no matter where I parked. The whispers slid through no matter how tight I sealed the curtains. Sometimes I saw people in the reflections, faces I didn't recognize, mouths shaping my name. Other times, I saw myself. Always myself. The worst was when I caught my reflection moving after I had stopped, a hand lifting when mine stayed still, a smile when my mouth was shut tight. I started covering the mirrors, but it didn't matter. The reflection found other ways. In windows, in puddles, in shadows cast across the dashboard. One night, pulled onto a lonely stretch of highway, I caught sight of headlights in the mirror. Relief surged. I wasn't alone out here. Another traveler. But when I looked closer, my stomach turned cold. The headlights weren't behind me. They were inside the reflection, beams cutting across the interior of my own van, even though nothing shone outside. That was when I stopped trusting what I saw at all. Days blurred, weeks, maybe. I couldn't tell anymore. Time folded just like it had in the forest. I only knew the pattern. Drive, stop, knock, whisper, reflection. Over and over until even my own voice sounded foreign to me. And through it all, the tree line followed. Closer, always closer. I thought maybe if I drove far enough, crossed a state line, a border, an ocean, it wouldn't matter. The forest wasn't a place anymore. It was me. One evening, somewhere in the desert, I pulled off the road. No trees for miles, just sand and stone, dry air cutting sharp in my throat. I thought maybe here, finally, I'd left it behind. I stood outside the van, staring at the horizon, the sunset burning red and gold. Then I heard it. The knock. Not on the van this time. Behind me, I turned and my chest froze. There, at the edge of the desert, where no trees should grow, a line of them stood, tall, black against the sunset, their trunks leaning toward me, and at their base, half-shadowed, was the other me. Still waiting, still smiling. I dropped to my knees, the knife slipping from my hand, dust filling my mouth as I gasped for air. My mind screamed to run, to fight, to deny it, but my body was heavy, my thoughts thick, because deep down I knew what I had refused to say aloud since Spruce Hollow. You don't escape the tree line. It escapes with you. And one day, when you're too tired to fight, too tired to drive, too tired to resist, it closes in. I lifted my head, eyes burning, and whispered into the silence, "Not yet." The trees swayed, though no wind blew. The figure's smile widened, and I drove on, knowing each mile was only a borrowed mile, each road only another circle. The tree line waits, always, and I don't know how much longer I can outrun myself. The desert stretched on endlessly, the road vanishing into a horizon that shimmered with heat. I told myself the trees couldn't survive here, that the barren expanse was proof they hadn't truly followed me. But the truth pressed heavier with each mile. Survival didn't matter. They weren't bound by roots or soil anymore. They were bound to me. Days bled into nights, nights into days. I stopped keeping track of where I was. States, borders, time zones. None of it mattered. Every rest stop looked the same. Every parking lot smelled faintly of sap, no matter how far from pine country I drove. Every reflection whispered my name, whether in a cracked bathroom mirror or the sheen of the van's paint under the sun. One night, exhausted beyond thought, I pulled into a lonely truck stop. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting the asphalt in a sickly glow. A diner stood at one end, its sign flickering weakly, the parking lot filled with long-haul rigs humming in sleep. For the first time in weeks, I didn't hear knocking. No breathing, no whispers. I stepped inside the diner, desperate for something human. The place was almost empty, just a waitress with tired eyes and a man hunched over a plate at the counter. The smell of coffee and fried food clung to the air, a smell so normal it nearly broke me. I sat at a booth, ordered black coffee, and wrapped my hands around the steaming mug as though it could anchor me. For a while it worked. The clink of cutlery, the scratch of pen on pad, the sizzle from the kitchen, they felt real, solid. Until I glanced out the window. The tree line stood at the edge of the lot. Not far, not close. Just watching. I froze, mug trembling in my grip. When I looked back, the waitress was staring at me. Her expression wasn't tired anymore. It was hollow. Her eyes, two dark pits, reflected trunks and branches swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. "You should have stayed," she said. The mug slipped from my hands, coffee spilling across the table. I bolted for the door, but the man at the counter stood to block me. His face rippled, bark cracking through his skin. We all do, he whispered. I shoved past him, stumbling out into the night air. My van waited, engine still warm, headlights catching the shimmer of sap on the pavement. I threw myself inside and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, heart hammering. The diner vanished behind me like it had never existed. From then on, I stopped trusting people. Every town I passed, every gas station attendant, every passing traveler, I saw the forest in their eyes. Sometimes I heard the knock even when no one was there. Sometimes I heard my own voice whisper from their mouths. Loneliness became the only thing I could trust. Weeks later, or maybe months, I found myself back in the mountains. Not the same ones, but mountains all the same, their ridges sharp against the sky, their valleys drowning in fog. The van crawled up winding roads, the air thinning, my body heavier with each turn. I don't remember choosing the campground. I don't remember parking. I just remember waking up, the curtains drawn, the silence pressing. And when I pulled them open, my heart dropped. The trees were there, closer than ever. They ringed the van completely. No road, no sky, no space left. Their trunks pressed so tight together I could see only shadows between them. The air smelled thick, sweet, metallic. The smell of surrender. I stumbled outside, knife in hand, shouting into the silence. What do you want from me? My voice cracked, echoed, came back distorted. The forest answered with movement. The trunks shifted, creaking, groaning, bending inward. Branches wove together above me, sealing the last patch of sky. The ground trembled beneath my boots. And then from between the trees, the figure stepped forward. Not pale now, not hollow, not layered faces. It was me, entirely me. Same clothes, same scars, same exhaustion carved into my features. I walked forward, calm, steady, eyes locked on mine. You already know, he said, my voice, my tone, my breath. I shook my head violently. I'm not you. He smiled, soft, patient. Not yet, but you will be. We all do. The trees creaked louder, closing tighter. Shadows slid across the ground, reaching like fingers. My knees buckled, the weight of it crushing. I dropped the knife, fell to the dirt, my breath ragged. The other me crouched low, tilting his head, studying me the way the figure always had. He reached out, fingers brushing my shoulder. The touch was cold, but familiar, like my own hand resting there. Stay, he whispered. The word pulsed inside me, in my veins, in my chest, in my bones. It wasn't a command anymore. It was inevitability. I wanted to fight. God, I wanted to. But my body sagged, my mind dulled, my thoughts tangled in roots I couldn't see. I saw flashes, faces of the others who had come before me, their lives, their endings, their surrender, all of them hollow, all of them trees now. And for the first time, I wondered if that was so terrible. No more running, no more fear, just stillness, forever. I closed my eyes, ready to give in. Then I felt it. Not the cold touch of him, not the pull of the forest, but the key in my pocket, small, metal, solid. The van's ignition key, my life on wheels, the only freedom I'd ever known. I gripped it tight, the edges biting into my palm, and something surged through me. Memory, the open road, the roar of the engine, the horizon stretching forever, not the forest's eternity, mine. I opened my eyes, teeth bared, and screamed into the dark. No! The trees recoiled. The figure's face twisted, not in anger, but in something worse, fear. For the first time, it stepped back. I staggered to my feet, key in hand, voice hoarse but steady. I won't stay. Not now. Not ever. The forest shuddered, branches snapping, shadows unraveling. The weight lifted just enough for me to move. I ran, blind, stumbling through the trunks, the key clenched in my fist like a blade. I don't remember how I found the van again. I don't remember starting the engine. I only remember the roar, the surge forward, the trees falling away in my rear view as I tore down the mountain road. But even as I drove, heart racing, tears burning, one truth gnawed at me. The tree line doesn't need roots. It only needs me. And sooner or later, I will be too tired to drive. I drove through the night, the van roaring down empty highways, my headlights slicing through dark that felt thicker than the sky should allow. My knuckles were white on the wheel, my foot pressed hard on the gas as if speed alone could keep the tree line from catching me. But deep down, I knew better. No matter how many miles I put behind me, the forest was always there, at the edges, in the shadows, inside. The world blurred past. Small towns, neon-lit diners, endless fields swaying in the dark. I kept moving, not because I believed I could escape, but because stopping meant surrender. And if the forest wanted me so badly, then I would make it chase me across every road this country had to offer. By dawn, I was exhausted. My eyelids sagged, my chest heavy. I pulled over on a ridge overlooking a valley, the horizon burning with sunrise. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The forest wasn't here. Just rolling hills, scattered farms, the sky opening wide. My body ached, my mind rattled, but the stillness soothed me. I climbed out of the van and stood on the ridge watching light spill across the land, and for a fleeting moment I believed maybe I had done it. Maybe I had outrun the tree line. Then I heard it. A cough. Small, sharp, carried on the morning air. My stomach clenched. Slowly, I turned. The boy stood at the edge of the ridge, pale, hollow-eyed, his hands hanging limp at his sides. His lips parted, but no sound came. And behind him, stretching across the valley where no trees should grow, a line of pines stood tall, their tops swaying though no wind touched them. Closer than before, I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, I left you behind. The boy tilted his head. Then his lips moved. And though I heard no sound, I knew what he said. Stay. I bolted back into the van, slammed the door, and twisted the key. The engine roared, tires screeching as I tore away from the ridge. My chest heaved, my eyes blurred with tears, but I kept driving. Faster, harder, until the valley vanished in my rear view. But the truth was carved into me now. The tree line doesn't care about places, doesn't care about borders or distance. It doesn't need to chase me anymore. It's inside me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces pressed into bark. Every time I hear silence, I hear the echo of knocking underneath it. Every time I glimpse myself in the mirror, I see the other me, waiting, patient, smiling. And I know what patience means. One day I'll be too tired to resist, too tired to drive, too tired to scream. I'll stop on some forgotten road, park the van, close my eyes, and when I open them again, the tree line will be there. Standing tall, whispering, claiming what it has been carving into me all along. But until that day comes, I will keep moving. Because there's something the forest doesn't understand, something it can't erase, no matter how many whispers it plants or reflections it distorts. I chose this life, this road, this freedom, and I will fight for every mile of it. So if you ever find yourself parked at the edge of a forest and you hear the knocking on your RV walls or the breathing in the dark or the whisper that sounds just a little too much like your own voice, don't make the mistake I did. Don't wait. Don't watch. Don't listen. Leave. Because once the tree line follows you, it never stops. It will wait for you at every road's end, every gas station, every empty stretch of highway. It will wait with my face, and maybe one day yours too. And when you see it, when you know deep in your bones that the forest is closer than it should be, remember this. You're not just fighting trees, you're fighting yourself. And that's the hardest battle of all. It started on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the Gulf Coast air presses against your skin like a damp sheet. The docks were quiet, not empty, but quiet in a way that made every sound feel exaggerated. Chains rattling, gulls screaming, the faint slap of water against pilings. I'd been working this port for almost 7 years, handling cargo on freighters that moved through like clockwork, yet nothing had ever felt like this. Something about the water that morning had weight, as if it carried the tension of everything that had passed and everything that was about to happen. I was finishing up the last checks on the container cranes when I noticed it. A freighter, drifting slowly into the harbor. At first, I assumed it was a miscommunication, maybe a ship running late that had been cleared for docking without notifying anyone. But it was strange. There was no crew visible on deck, no tugboats assisting, no radio chatter. The ship glided to the dock like it knew exactly where it was supposed to be. It anchored itself with precision that no human team could have executed in perfect silence. I rubbed my eyes, thought I was seeing a mirage, maybe fatigue after long night shifts, But the metal hull sat there, wet and dark against the rising sun, perfectly aligned and eerily still. By the time I reached the dock edge, my boots echoing against the concrete, I realized something that made the hair on my neck stand up. There were footprints on the gangway, slick with water, leading ashore. Not 100 of them, just a few sets spaced strangely, as if someone or something had wandered casually, unhurried, like they owned the space. I should have called someone right then. Standard procedure would have been to alert security, the harbor master, the Coast Guard. But there was a hesitation in me, an almost hypnotic need to see. Something about the scene insisted I follow, even as my rational mind screamed to stay back. The smell hit first, metallic, sharp, mixed with a faint sweet rot I couldn't place. It clung to the air, to my clothes, to the hairs on my forearms. I thought at first it was rust, but rust doesn't smell like fear. I inhaled carefully, trying to identify the source, but there was no one around to ask. The dock was empty, the cranes unmoving, the water still slapping softly. Even the gulls had retreated to the far end of the harbor, leaving an oppressive silence that made each step feel like it could shatter. I followed the footprints. They didn't move like normal human strides. There was a deliberate cadence, almost rhythmic, as if the walker was counting each step, but irregular in places, like the pattern was broken by moments of hesitation or indecision. My stomach tightened as I neared the edge of the dock, where the shadows pooled, where the water seemed to curl around the pilings like fingers. I expected to see a figure step out from behind a container, a deckhand, a trespasser, but there was nothing. Just the footprints, wet and glistening in the sunlight, leading onto the shore where the sand was still damp with the tide. I knelt, touching the edge of one print. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Too deep in some places, too shallow in others. Almost like the weight of the walker shifted unnaturally. I pulled back quickly, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I told myself I was imagining it, that the tide, the sun, the uneven dock surface could make footprints appear distorted. Rationality tried to claw its way back, but a low hum in my ears suggested something else, something just beyond the edge of perception. That's when I noticed the ship's hull more clearly. Windows that should have reflected the morning sun were black, empty. No crew moving inside. The bridge, which should have been lit and bustling, sat dark, like a hollowed-out chest. The ropes and chains that normally clattered in the wind were taut and motionless. It was as if the ship itself had paused, holding its breath. And then I heard it, a faint scratching, rhythmic, coming from inside, almost imperceptible at first. I froze, my hands clenched into fists. The sound stopped. My eyes scanned the ship again, looking for signs of life, any movement at all. Nothing. I took a step back toward the shore, wanting distance, wanting something familiar. That's when the footprints shifted. I swear, Luke, the prints moved slightly, as if the walker had stepped forward while I wasn't looking. I blinked, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the tide had reached the dock overnight. Maybe the sand had settled differently. But I knew that wasn't it. My stomach nodded as I realized the prints weren't moving in a random path. They were heading toward the marshland beyond the port, deeper into a stretch of wild Florida swamp I'd been told to avoid after dark. I tried calling the harbor master on my radio, my voice shaky, unnatural in the calm. Harbor master, this is Dock 2. There's a freighter at the North Pier, unmanned. Repeat, no crew visible. Static filled the line. Then a voice, faint and garbled, broke through. Doc, everything okay? That wasn't the harbor master. It was too distorted, too shallow, like someone breathing through a paper cup. I clicked the radio off, heart hammering. No rational explanation. My mind raced. Tugboats, Coast Guard, pirates, hallucinations from dehydration. None of it fit. I thought about walking away, calling it in later, but something about the footprints pulled me forward, a terrible gravity in the air. I followed them down the wooden gangway, each plank creaking underfoot. The water beneath reflected a dull, oily shimmer, and I thought I saw shapes swimming just below the surface. Shadows that didn't belong to any passing fish, moving with purpose just beneath the hull. Every instinct screamed to turn around, run, radio for help. But a compulsion, I still can't explain it, kept me moving. The dock ended, and the sand of the shore felt unnervingly soft, almost sponge-like. Each footprint I followed left a faint echo, wet impressions that seemed to suck the sound out of the morning. I could hear my own breathing as if it were amplified, as if the air itself had thickened to trap it. The trees of the swamp loomed ahead, cypress knees poking up like teeth, roots twisting and blackened by tide and rot. The footprints led straight into that darkness, and for a moment I considered stopping, turning back, reporting the anomaly as a technical glitch, a hallucination, anything. But then I saw it. A small piece of cloth tangled in a cypress knee, soaked and darkened by water. It looked like part of a uniform, maybe from the ship, maybe from someone who'd worked the docks before me. My stomach dropped. Whoever or whatever had walked here had come from that ship. And now I realized something else. There were no other footprints leading back. Only these, leading deeper into the swamp. I swallowed hard, a cold sweat running down my back. The air changed suddenly, heavier, fouler, carrying the faint scent of salt, rust, and something else, something like scorched meat, or maybe old fish. My hands shook as I raised a flashlight, sweeping it across the trees. Shadows leapt and receded, caught in the waterlogged roots and hanging moss. I could hear faint snapping, like twigs breaking under careful, deliberate steps. My own feet felt heavier, as if the swamp itself was pulling at me, reluctant to let me leave. And then I heard it, clear this time. A voice, low and wet, coming from just beyond the cypress knees. Not a shout, not a word I recognized, just a rasping whisper, barely audible over the soft lapping of water. My mind scrambled for logic. Dock workers, tourists, pranksters? Impossible. No one had access to this part of the swamp without boats or waders. And yet the voice was there, taunting, echoing across the water and roots. I froze, unable to move, unable to call out. The world had narrowed to that whisper and the slow, deliberate rhythm of the footprints leading away from me. By the time I realized I was alone, truly alone, the ship had become almost a background object, an anchor in a landscape that had grown impossibly hostile. I couldn't see the pier anymore, only the narrowing path through trees, roots, and mud. My boots sank into wet sand with every step. My flashlight flickered, the batteries draining faster than they should. The whispering returned, closer now, circling, moving in ways that made no sense. I don't know how long I followed the footprints, hours, minutes. Time lost meaning. The sun climbed higher, then started to dip, and I was still walking, my senses stretched thin. The swamp seemed alive, breathing, shifting. Branches that weren't there a second ago blocked the path. Roots tripped me as if someone or something was laying traps just for me. And through it all, the footprints continued, leading me further from the harbor, further from safety, and deeper into the unknown. I thought I saw figures moving through the mist at the water's edge, shapes that resembled dock workers but weren't quite right, limbs too long, heads tilted at angles that shouldn't be possible. And each time I blinked, they were gone. The whispering grew into a chorus of indistinguishable voices, echoing from the hull of that freighter I could no longer see, voices that seemed to know my name, to know the weight of my fear. I reached a clearing where the footprints ended, and there was nothing. No sign of life, no sign of the ship, just mud, water, and the suffocating smell of rot. Panic surged through me. I wanted to turn back, to run, but the swamp had rearranged itself. The path I'd taken was gone, replaced by impenetrable brush, brackish water, and shadows that moved when I wasn't looking. I realized then that this wasn't about the ship. It was about the swamp, about whatever had left those footprints and wanted me to see, to follow, to feel the inevitability of being watched. I screamed into the thick, humid air. My voice bounced back at me in distorted echoes. No response, no help. Just the wet, rhythmic pressure of silence. And somewhere far away, yet impossible to locate, I heard the faint sound of chains, dragging against metal. I ran. I ran through the swamp, boots sinking into the mud with every step, my flashlight bobbing and cutting through the mist in uneven arcs. The air was thick, suffocating, full of the smell of wet wood, decay, and that faint metallic tang I couldn't place. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but there was no other choice. Something was chasing me, or perhaps following me, letting me know I wasn't alone. Every snapped twig, every splash of water against a hidden root felt deliberate, like the swamp itself was watching, and it was learning my pace. The trees grew closer together, their gnarled roots and hanging moss forming natural barriers. I twisted and turned through narrow gaps, my flashlight beam catching glimpses of shadows that weren't mine. Shapes that mimicked human form, hunched figures that vanished when I blinked. I could hear whispers now, fragments of words, phrases I almost recognized, repeated in a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. My mind tried to make sense of it, hallucinations, exhaustion, dehydration. But the weight of reality pressed down on me, cold and undeniable. Something in the swamp was awake, waiting, calculating. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a small clearing. The ground was firmer here, sand mixed into a flat patch that almost seemed unnatural. And there it was, the freighter. At first, I thought I'd lost my mind. How had it moved? I was miles from the harbor, but there it rested, anchored in a shallow inlet that wasn't on any map, perfectly still, its black windows reflecting the gray sky. The footprints led directly to the edge of the water, then stopped. No continuation into the ship, no sign of anyone boarding. Just silence. I approached cautiously, the mud sucking at my boots, and noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the deck, a single rope ladder hung over the side, swaying gently in the windless air. It wasn't there when I first saw the ship at the harbor. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I needed answers. Someone had to be on that ship. Someone had to explain this impossible journey. These footprints, the whispering voices. I climbed the ladder with trembling hands, my fingers slick with water, and stepped onto the deck. It was empty. Completely empty. No signs of life, no cargo movement, no echo of footsteps that should have been here. The bridge, visible through the blacked-out windows, was empty as well. But then I noticed it. A thin film of condensation on one of the portholes, wiped away in a clear, deliberate pattern. Finger-sized streaks, like someone had pressed their hands against the glass, just enough to leave a trail. I followed the marks with my eyes, heart hammering, and realized they led down a corridor, deeper into the ship. I swallowed hard and stepped inside. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and carried that same metallic rot scent I'd noticed at the dock. My flashlight illuminated walls that gleamed wetly, reflecting my own panicked face back at me. I moved cautiously, each step on the metal deck echoing loudly, as if the ship itself was listening. The corridor twisted unexpectedly, leading me to a staircase down. I hesitated, every rational part of my brain screaming that I should turn back, that no one was down there. But the whispers followed, soft and coaxing, almost intimate, tugging at the edges of my fear. The lower deck was darker, colder. Water dripped from the ceiling in random patterns, puddling at my feet. And that's when I saw them. Objects scattered across the floor. Not cargo, not containers. Personal items, a dockworker's gloves, a life vest, a hard hat with a name tag, a small notebook soaked and partially illegible. All familiar, but none matched anyone I recognized. And in the center of the room, a shallow pool of water reflected something I couldn't comprehend. The reflection didn't match the ceiling or the walls. It reflected a version of me standing there, but wrong. Limbs too long, eyes darker, head tilting unnaturally. I blinked and the reflection was normal again. My pulse raced. I turned to leave, only to find the stairwell gone. The deck above was gone, replaced by a solid wall of metal. Panic surged. My rational mind attempted explanations, hallucinations, structural shifts, stress-induced delirium, but nothing fit. I was trapped in a place that defied my understanding of space and time, and the whispering had grown louder, filling the room with overlapping voices that repeated my own name. Phrases I couldn't fully comprehend but understood with a deep, bone-chilling certainty. You're here. You belong. I ran blindly through the lower deck, each corridor seeming to stretch further than it should, bending in ways that made no architectural sense. The ship was alive, or something within it was, manipulating space to disorient me. I caught glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision, shapes that shouldn't have been able to exist in the narrow corridors. They mimicked human form but moved like water, shifting unnaturally. Every turn I took, the whispers followed, morphing, echoing, pressing against the inside of my skull. And then I found the hatch, a small, round door leading below the main deck, partially submerged in water. Something compelled me to open it, a whisper so intimate it felt like it was coming from inside my own chest. The hatch swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. I hesitated only for a moment before climbing down, drawn by a mixture of terror and the need to understand. The lower chamber was filled with water, waist-deep and icy cold. Objects floated, crates, barrels, indistinct shapes, but also pieces of clothing and personal items from people I knew or thought I knew. My mind screamed at me, telling me this couldn't be real. Yet the water lapped against my skin with undeniable physicality. The whispering coalesced into something almost coherent. They came first. Now you. I turned, and for the first time I saw them. Shapes, half submerged in water, humanoid but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions, faces blurred as if smeared by water. They watched me, silent, unblinking, and I felt every instinct in my body scream that I should flee. But there was nowhere to go, only water, walls, and the impossible architecture of the ship. I backed away slowly, careful not to disturb them, but one shifted, stepping forward with a wet, unnatural grace. It didn't walk, it glided, flowing over the water, a motion I couldn't have predicted, couldn't have trained for. And then I realized it was following the rhythm of my breathing, matching it perfectly, as if it knew me intimately. My terror turned to nausea. I wanted to scream, but the air seemed to constrict, making sound impossible. I stumbled backward into a crate, splashing water over my flashlight. Darkness engulfed me. The whispers became a chorus of overlapping voices, echoing not just in my ears but inside my head. You belong. You came. You followed. I struck matches, one after another, and each flare revealed them closer, circling, silent, watching, always watching. I ran blindly, breaking through a rusted door, bursting onto another deck. This one was empty, eerily quiet, with only the faint smell of salt and decay. And then I heard it, a low, metallic scraping from above, from the ship's bridge. My stomach dropped. I had to get out. I had to find a way to escape. The ladder back to the upper deck was gone again, replaced by solid metal. My only choice was to follow the sound, toward the bridge, toward the noise that promised answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The bridge was a cage of glass and metal. I could see outside through the wet windows. Swamp, trees, the gray light of late afternoon, but no harbor, no docks, no human life. Just the ship, perfectly still, floating in this impossible inlet. And in the center of the bridge, a single chair faced away from me. Slowly I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The chair was empty, or it appeared empty. Then it moved. A figure rose from the chair, too tall, too thin, its movements unnervingly precise. I blinked. The face was a blur, features distorted like water rippling across a mirror. And then it spoke. Not words, not liege, but a vibration that resonated inside my chest, inside my skull. A recognition. A claim. I froze. The whispers stopped. Silence fell heavier than air, suffocating. I don't remember how I left the ship. One moment I was frozen. The next I was running through the swamp, sun dipping below the horizon, the smell of rot and metal fading only slightly. When I reached the edge of the marsh, the dock appeared, ordinary and empty, as if nothing had happened. The freighter was gone, vanished, no signs of it ever existing beyond the faint indentation of the mud where the footprints had started. I called the harbor master. I searched for surveillance footage. Nothing. No reports, no missing crew, no ship docking overnight. Just me, alone, with the memory and the faint, rhythmic whisper that sometimes returns in dreams, sometimes in quiet moments at the dock. You followed. You belong. I quit the job shortly after. I haven't been back to the harbor. And yet, years later, when the wind is just right, carrying the salt and rot of the Gulf Coast through the windows of my apartment, I swear I can hear the scraping of metal, the wet echoes of impossible footsteps, and the soft, persistent whispers calling my name. After that day, I couldn't go back to normal life. My friends and family noticed the changes. How I flinched at sudden sounds, how I avoided water after storms, how I never passed the harbor without my stomach twisting. I tried rational explanations: fatigue, stress, dehydration, hallucination. But nothing accounted for the footprints, the ship, the whispers, the shapes in the water. My mind clung to every logical escape route, but the memory refused to be dismissed. Sleep was impossible. In dreams, I returned to the swamp, to the ship, to the lower deck filled with water and objects that shouldn't have existed. The whispers returned, but in dreams they were louder, clearer, more insistent. You followed. You belong. Sometimes I would wake drenched, convinced the smell of wet metal and decay lingered in the room. I moved apartments twice, but the sensation never fully left me. It was like a residue of the ship, an imprint of the experience embedded in my senses. Years later, I returned briefly to Florida, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. I walked the docks near the old harbor, heart hammering with a mix of fear and a need to verify what had happened. The docks were normal, mundane, bustling with cranes and cargo and human voices. The freighter was nowhere in sight, no unusual footprints, no anomalies. It was as if the event had been erased, or maybe it had never been observed by anyone but me. Yet, when the wind shifted off the Gulf, carrying the tang of salt and something faintly metallic, I paused. My stomach tightened. In the distance, I could swear I heard a scraping sound, faint but deliberate, like metal being dragged across the deck of a ship. I turned sharply, but all I saw were the ordinary vessels, tugboats, cranes, and gulls wheeling overhead. Still, I felt it, the undeniable weight of being watched. And deep in my chest, I heard the whisper, almost inaudible, carried with the wind. You followed. You belong. I left that day with the certainty that the ship, whatever it was, still existed somewhere, anchored in some hidden inlet or dimension beyond perception, waiting for the next person to follow, to step onto the deck, to hear the whispers calling their name. I tried to warn others, but words fail when you recount experiences like this. No one sees the footsteps, no one hears the voices, no one believes. And that's perhaps the cruelest part. The isolation is not just physical, but mental. The knowledge is yours alone. Since then, my life has been fractured. Every time I step near water, I glance at shadows, listening for the slightest scrape, the slightest whisper. Every time a freighter passes by, perfectly aligned with no visible crew, I feel that old compulsion tug at me, that faint pull toward the impossible. The memories persist in photographs I took of the harbor, in old surveillance footage I swore I'd seen but can no longer find, in the wet streaks on walls after storms that I know I didn't make. I've told a few people about it, coworkers, friends, but they dismiss it as stress, fatigue, or imagination. I don't blame them. How could they understand? I don't fully understand it myself. All I know is that something in the Gulf Coast, in that water, in the ship that anchored itself without hands, changed me. And I am haunted, in ways both subtle and undeniable, by footprints that shouldn't exist, by whispers that shouldn't be heard, by a presence I cannot prove but will never forget. The ship never returns in daylight, and perhaps that is a mercy. But at night, when the wind is right, when the tides pull the air off the Gulf in thick, damp waves, I sometimes hear it. The dragging metal, the echo of water against hull, the soft, wet footprints approaching. And for a fraction of a second, I feel the compulsion again. The pull to follow, to step into the impossible, to join what waits in the shadows just beyond comprehension. I've learned to live with it, but I am not the same person I was before the day I saw the freighter, before I followed the footprints, before I realized that silence can be as oppressive and knowing as a predator. The truth of what happened is buried in the swamp, in the ship, in a place no one else can reach. And some nights when the wind carries that metallic, salty scent, I swear I can hear the faint whisper, You followed. You belong. There is no resolution. There is only the memory, the pull, the awareness that some things are real even when they defy reason. The harbor continues, the docks bustle, life carries on. And I carry the echo of the freighter, the whispers, the footprints, and the certainty that some part of me remains out there, somewhere, tied to a ship that anchors itself without hands, and to a place I can never fully leave. It started on a Thursday morning. The Gulf Coast air pressed against my skin like a damp sheet. The docks were quiet, too quiet, so quiet that every sound seemed amplified. Chains rattling, gulls screaming, water slapping against pilings. I'd been working this port for almost 7 years, yet nothing had ever felt like this. The air had weight, as if it carried the tension of everything that had passed and everything that was about to happen. Pause. Slightly lower tone. I was finishing up checks on the cranes when I saw it, a freighter, drifting silently into the harbor. No crew visible, no tugboats, no radio chatter. It glided to the dock with precision no human team could match. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe fatigue, maybe a trick of the light. But the metal hull sat there wet and dark against the rising sun, perfectly aligned, eerily still. Pause. Footsteps on wood faintly layered in soundscape. By the time I reached the dock, I noticed wet footprints on the gangway. Only a few, spaced strangely, as if the walker were unhurried. I should have called someone. Standard procedure would have been to alert the harbor master, the Coast Guard. But I didn't. Something compelled me to follow. Something about the scene insisted I see. The smell hit first. Sharp metal mixed with a faint, sweet rot I couldn't place. It clung to the air, to my clothes, to the hairs on my forearms. I inhaled cautiously. The dock was empty, the cranes unmoving, and even the gulls had retreated. Silence, thick and heavy. Pause. Whispered background sound, faint, unintelligible, like voices carried on the wind. I followed the footprints. They didn't move like normal human strides, deliberate, counting each step, yet irregular, broken by hesitation. My stomach tightened as I neared the edge of the dock, shadows pooling around pilings like fingers. I expected to see a figure, a deckhand, someone, but there was nothing. Only footprints leading into the marsh beyond the port, deeper into swamp I'd been warned to avoid. I tried calling the harbor master on my radio. My voice shook. Harbor master, dock 2 freighter, no crew visible. Static filled the line. Then a voice, garbled, shallow, like breathing through a paper cup. Dock. Everything okay? I clicked it off, heart hammering. My rational mind screamed, tugboats, pirates, hallucinations. None fit. Pause. Let the whispering swell subtly. I followed the footprints onto the shore. The sand felt unnaturally soft. Each step left a faint echo. The trees of the swamp loomed ahead, roots twisting and blackened, hanging moss swaying like specters. The footprints led straight into darkness, and I thought of turning back. I wanted to. I knew I should, but something pulled me forward. A piece of cloth tangled in a cypress knee caught my eye, wet, darkened by water. Part of a uniform. My stomach sank. Whoever or whatever had walked here had come from that ship. There were no other footprints leading back. Only these into the swamp. Pause. Layered faint water dripping sounds. The air shifted, heavier, fouler, the scent of salt and rot, metallic undertones. My hands shook as I raised a flashlight. Shadows danced, twisted, leapt at the edge of my vision. Twigs snapped behind me. I thought I glimpsed figures. Dock workers, hunched, distorted. And every time I blinked, gone. I reached a clearing where the footprints ended. Nothing, just mud, water, and suffocating silence. Panic surged. I tried to retrace my path, but the swamp had rearranged itself. Paths gone, replaced by brush, roots, water. The whispers returned. Close now. Circling me, repeating my name. Long pause. Increase intensity in whispering for effect. I don't know how long I ran. Hours? Minutes? Time lost meaning. The sun climbed, then dipped, and still I ran. The swamp seemed alive, with breathing, shifting. Shadows with limbs too long, heads tilted unnaturally. Every turn, the whispers pressed against the inside of my skull. And then I saw it. The freighter. Miles from the harbor, anchored in a shallow inlet I'd never known existed. The footprints led to the water, then stopped. No crew. No movement. Silence. I approached cautiously. On deck, a single rope ladder swayed gently. Not there before. My instincts screamed to leave, but I needed answers. I climbed, hands trembling, water dripping onto the deck. Pause. Heartbeat sound layered subtly. The deck was empty, the bridge dark, but on one porthole, condensation wiped in deliberate streaks, finger-sized. They led into a corridor, deeper into the ship. I swallowed hard, stepping inside. The air was cold, metallic, thick with that smell. Corridors twisted impossibly, leading downward, and whispers coaxed me. You're here. You belong. The lower deck was waist-deep in icy water. Objects floated, crates, barrels, clothing, personal items. Reflections warped my own image, wrong, distorted, limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally. Blinking, it returned to normal. My pulse raced. I backed away, startled, into the water. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Humanoid, but wrong. Limbs bending unnaturally. Watching. Waiting. One glided forward, following the rhythm of my breathing, precise, intimate. My fear became nausea, terror becoming physical. Pause. Whispering rises again, overlapping voices. I stumbled into another corridor, blindly fleeing. Corridors stretched impossibly, bending, disorienting. Shapes flitted at the edge of vision. I struck matches, illuminating them, circling, silent, watching. I ran, finally bursting onto another deck. The sun dipped below the horizon. The docks I knew were gone. The ship alone, floating in its impossible inlet. Scraping metal echoed from the bridge. Compulsion pulled me toward it. The bridge was empty, or appeared empty. A single chair rose, tall, thin, movements unnerving, face blurred, features rippling, a vibration inside my chest, inside my skull, recognition. Claim. I froze. Long pause. I don't remember how I left. One moment trapped, the next running through the swamp, back to the harbor. The freighter vanished. No footprints, no signs, nothing, only the memory. And the whisper, faint, persistent. You followed. You belong. Years later, the wind carries that scent. Salt, rot, metal. I hear it. The dragging hull. Wet footprints approaching. That compulsion, always there, subtle, relentless. I am not the same. The harbor bustles, life continues, but a part of me remains tethered to that ship, that swamp, to a presence that waits, waiting for the next person to follow, to hear the whispers, to step into the impossible. Long pause, fade in, subtle water, wind and faint whispering under voiceover as it trails off. You followed. You belong.